For 2,000 years I built houses out of hell. That is not a metaphor. In hell, the ground melts what you set on it, and the wind is made of teeth, and every shelter I raised out of stone and will and clone labor stood until dawn, and then came apart in my hands. So I built it again, and again. 20,000 mornings of the same wall collapsing. That was survival to me. Survival meant the thing that wanted to kill you could not, because you had already rebuilt the wall before it arrived. So when I walked into the human world through a crack in the sky and found a village that had stood for 100 years without anyone rebuilding it once, I stopped and stared like an idiot. The village was called Misono, 200 people maybe. Wooden houses with roofs that had clearly leaked in the same corner for a decade and been patched by the same lazy hand every time. Smoke from cook fires. A well. A dog. A crooked fence that no one had bothered to straighten because it was not going to fall down for years, and years in this world apparently meant something. I had a thunder dragon over my shoulder. I had hunted it myself, 3 days north, in the mountains where the storms live. It had been a real fight, I want to be honest about that, because later people will say a demon simply took what he wanted, and it was not like that. The dragon nearly cooked me twice. I brought its meat down the mountain because I was hungry, and because I did not know yet that you could arrive somewhere and be fed. In hell you did not arrive, you occupied. There was a guard at the gate. A boy, really, 17 at most, holding a spear like it might bite him. Toll, he said. His voice cracked on the word. 1 copper, or trade goods. I set down the dragon meat. It was worth more than the whole village, and I could see him understand that, and I could see him decide not to be a coward about it anyway, which I respected. I gave him a copper coin. You don't, sir. That's a dragon. You don't have to pay the... Rules are rules. I closed his hand around the coin. It's a promise I made to myself, a long time ago. He looked at me the way people look at something they cannot categorize. Then he shrugged and let me in, and that was the second thing this world did that I did not expect. It let me in. The meat was too much for one man, so I gave it away, and that is how it started. I did not understand, at first, why they were laughing. I stood by the well roasting dragon over a fire I had built too hot, and people came and they took the meat and they laughed. Not at me. Around me. A child dropped his portion in the dirt and wailed, and his mother laughed and gave him half of hers, and he laughed too, snot and tears and grease, and I stood there holding a skewer and felt something in my chest do a thing it had not done in 2,000 years. In hell, laughter meant someone below you had found something to enjoy about your suffering. Here it meant nothing. It was just noise people made when they were warm and fed. An old woman told me the dragon was the best meat the village had eaten in 10 years, and then complained at length that I had ruined it by over-charring the outside, and she took the skewer out of my hand to show me how it was done, and she scolded me, a demon who had leveled cities, about heat control, and I let her because I did not want it to end. A girl named Emma noticed my hands. She was maybe 19, sharp-faced, with the kind of eyes that catalog a problem before you know you have one. She looked at where the skewers had rubbed my palms and made a small annoyed sound. You'll get blisters holding it like that. And when you ride out, you'll get worse. The rains will tear you up. Here. She measured my hand with her own, frowning. I'll sew you gloves. Red. So you don't lose them. Men always lose things that aren't loud. I said thank you. I did not tell her that demons do not blister. That my hands could not callous if I dragged them across broken glass for a year. That she was solving a problem I did not have, out of a kindness aimed at a man who did not exist. I let her measure my hand and I apologized to her, silently, for accepting a gift under false colors, and I decided I would wear the gloves anyway, every day. Because it was the first thing anyone had ever made for me on purpose. That is a small thing to build a soul around. I know that now, but you build with what the ground gives you. There was a man named Genta. He found me the 3rd day, sitting outside the village, where I had been sleeping under a tree because I did not want to take a bed from anyone. He was broad, plain, the kind of man who is good at exactly one thing, and knows it in his case, farming and being decent, which I suppose is 2 things. They drafted me, he said. He said it flatly, the way you report weather. Kings raising levies. War with Myce again. I leave in the morning. I did not know what he wanted from me, so I said nothing, which is my instinct with people. Wait. Let them show you the shape of what they need. My wife's carrying, he said. Emma. Boy, the midwife thinks. Due in the spring. He turned the copper toll coin over in his fingers. My coin. The one I'd given the gate boy. And I understood then that this was a village where a strange copper coin passed hand to hand, and everyone knew whose it had been. I've watched you 3 days, you don't take. You gave us a dragon and slept under a tree. That's a strange thing for a strong man to be. I'm not a good man, I told him. It was the truest thing I had said in 2,000 years. Didn't ask you to be good. He looked at me. Asked you to look after them. If I don't come back. I did not promise. I want that on the record too, because of what happened later, because of the oath and everything the oath cost. I did not promise Genta anything. I said nothing at all, and he took my nothing as a yes because he was a hopeful man, and he went to war the next morning, and I stayed because the food was warm and the laughter was free, and Ima was sewing me red gloves, and I had nowhere in either world I wanted to be more than here. I stayed 1 week. I smelled it before I saw it. I had gone north again for firewood, an excuse, really. An excuse to walk in a forest that did not want to kill me, and on the wind coming back there was smoke that was the wrong color. Not cookfire smoke. Cookfire smoke is gray and lazy. This was black and greasy, and it climbed straight up because it was too hot to drift. I ran. I have not run in 2,000 years. In hell you do not run because there is nowhere to run to. Misono was ash. Every house. The well had a body draped over it. The crooked fence had finally fallen down, and it had fallen down because it had burned. The dog was dead in the road. The old woman who had scolded me about heat control was in her doorway, and she had not gotten out, and I could not for a moment understand heat that killed the woman who understood heat. I have a thing I can do. I do not like to name it because naming it makes it more real. The demon's eye. I can read the dead. Not their souls. Their souls are gone, and I am glad of that, but the last things printed on the meat of them, the final minutes burned into the body the way a scream stays in a throat after the throat is cold. I read them all. I made myself read all 200. Here is what happened. Holy knights came. 40 of them, a full detachment, blessed steel and white surcoats, and a cardinal with them. They had felt a demon felt me, the residue of 2,000 years of wrongness that I carry the way a corpse carries rot no matter how it is washed. They tracked the feeling to Misono. They found dragon meat, my dragon meat, and dragon that size does not fall to a village of farmers, and they demanded to know who had brought it. They demanded the source, and the village Genta's village, the village that let me in and fed me and sewed me gloves, the village did not give me up. Not because they knew what I was, they did not know what I was. They gave me up as a stranger who had shared a dragon and slept under a tree, and they were told, produce him or burn. They did not produce me. They could not. I was in the forest, gathering wood I did not need. So the knights burned them for harboring a demon they had never met, to punish a crime they had committed by accident, out of a kindness I had accepted under false colors. I stood in the ash, and I read the last minutes of 200 people who had died because they were decent to me, and something that I had spent 2,000 years holding shut came open. I do not remember choosing. I remember the detachment was still visible on the south road, unhurried, 40 white shapes walking away from a thing they considered finished. I remember I looked up, and I remember I brought the sky down on them. I will not describe it. You do not need it described. 40 of the blessed and their horses and the road under them ceased in a single strike from above, and the sound of it flattened the burned village flatter, and the crater is still there, they say, though grass grows in it now, and children play in it, and no one remembers why it is round. And then I felt myself sliding. That is the part no one tells you about being a demon. It is not that you want to be cruel. It is that cruelty is the bottom of a slope, and the slope is always there, and grief greases it. I had killed 40, and it had not helped, and there was a whole continent of people who had never lifted a finger against me, and I could feel the old logic returning, the hell logic. Occupy, do not arrive. The wall comes down at dawn, so bring it down yourself first, a baby cried. It came from a wooden chest. A grain chest, the heavy kind, the kind you close against rats. And someone had put a child in it and closed the lid, and the lid had held against the fire because it was thick oak banked with earth on the cellar side, and inside the chest, alive, red-faced, furious, was a newborn. Around his neck was a necklace. I had given that necklace to Ima. A trinket, a nothing, a bit of blued metal I'd carried out of the mountains and pressed on her when she refused payment for the gloves. She had put it on her son the moment he was born, the midwife's shade told me later, so that he would have something from the strange, kind man who paid tolls no one asked for. Genta's boy. Due in the spring. Born and orphaned, and the only living thing in 200 deaths. I picked him up. I did not know how. My hands, The hands that had just erased 40 men did not know the shape of a child, and he screamed at me for it. And I held him wrong, and he screamed louder, and I held him a little less wrong, and he did not stop, but he changed his mind about the volume. I looked at him. He looked at nothing, because newborns cannot see, and I understood that he could not see the thing holding him, and that this was possibly the only mercy in the entire day. I made an oath. I did not make it to a god. I have met gods, and I do not care for them. I made it on my own soul, which for a demon is the only collateral that means anything, the one thing that cannot be faked or rebuilt at dawn. I swore I would raise him, not raise him safe. Anyone can keep a thing in a chest. I swore I would raise him into the happiest man alive because Genta had asked me to look after them and I had said nothing, and the nothing was a debt now, and I pay my debts. Rules are rules. It is a promise I make to myself. I did not understand, standing there, what an oath sworn on a demon's soul actually does, what it feeds on, how it ends. I would not understand for 12 years. If I had understood, I would still have sworn it. I want that on the record too. I named him Hikaru, light. Because I had just made a great deal of darkness and I owed the world at least one thing pointed the other way. Behind me, someone was breathing. I turned. On the far edge of the ash, where the heat had not reached, a single white shape stood inside a shell of light. A shield, a real one, divine, the kind the church only gives to men it has invested in. My strike from the sky had hit 40, and this one had lived because he had been standing apart, and because his god, for reasons of its own, had chosen to keep him. A cardinal, old even then. Thin, ash on his robes, his face doing something I have seen since only on the faces of men, in the grip of a certainty they mistake for holiness. He was not looking at me with fear. That is what I remember. He was looking at me the way Emma had looked at my hands cataloging a problem, measuring it. His lips were moving and I realized he was not praying. He was memorizing. The shape of the strike, the color of the light, the way the sky had come down. He was writing it on the inside of his skull so that he would have it forever, so that no matter how long it took, he would be able to answer it. Cardinal Joa, though I did not learn his name for years, he did not attack. He could not. His shield was the last of his strength, and he knew it. And I did not kill him, though I could have, though every cell of the thing I had almost become was screaming to close the account. I did not kill him because I was holding a baby, and I could not do both, and I chose the baby. That is the whole of it, in the end. That is the entire story you are about to hear, compressed into 1 second in the ash. A demon with the power to end a continent chose to hold a child with both hands, and so left one enemy alive, and that enemy spent 200 years turning that 1 second of mercy into a crusade. Joa's shield guttered out. He stumbled back into the tree line and was gone. I let him go. Hikaru had finally stopped crying. He had, in fact, fallen asleep, exhausted, against a chest I did not know how to make safe, in a village I did not know how to rebuild, in a world I did not know how to live in without breaking. I looked down at him. I looked at the crater. I looked at the ash that had been the only kindness I had ever known. All right, I said, to no one. To Genta, maybe. To Ima. To the old woman who understood heat. A house of two isn't safe. I did not know yet that it would take a city. I pulled Emma's gloves from my belt. She had finished them. They had been on my belt the whole time, red, so I would not lose them, and I could not put them on because my hands were full of her son. So I held them in my teeth like a fool, and I started walking south, away from the ash, into a life I had not planned to have. That was 2,000 years of building houses that fell down at dawn. This one, I decided, was going to stand. Here is a list of things I can do. I can bring the sky down on 40 armored men. I can read the dead. I can raise a wall of stone in the time it takes you to breathe, and make clay into hands that work, and split a mountain if a mountain is what stands between me and a thing I have decided to do. Here is a list of things I cannot do. I cannot make a baby stop crying. I have tried everything. I have tried holding him high, and holding him low, and holding him against my chest and against my shoulder. I have tried humming I do not know any songs, so I hummed the sound of the wind in hell, which was a mistake, because it made him cry harder, and I do not blame him. It is a terrible sound. I have tried explaining to him calmly and at length that there is nothing to cry about, that we are safe, that I have raised a barrier around this valley that nothing living can cross without my knowing. He does not care. He is 4 months old. He does not know what a barrier is. He knows that he is uncomfortable in some way he cannot name, and that the only response available to him is volume. We are in a valley 2 days south of the ash. I chose it because it was empty. No village to burn, no people to endanger, no one within a day's walk. I built a house, a good house. Stone, tight, the first house I have ever built that I intended to see the sun rise on more than once. The clay clones did most of it. I make them out of the valley's own earth. 4 of them. Mindless things shaped like men that do the lifting I would rather not do while holding a child. The clones cannot handle Hikaru. I learned this on the second day. I was tired. I did not yet understand tired. I had not slept in 2,000 years because demons do not require it. But I was learning that not requiring a thing and not wanting it are different, and that a screaming infant introduces you to wants you did not know a body could have. I set Hikaru in the arms of a clay clone so that I could dig the well. The clone held him correctly, gently, exactly as instructed. Hikaru screamed like I had thrown him in a fire. Babies know. That is the thing no one tells you. They cannot see, they cannot speak, they cannot hold up their own heads. But they know the difference between arms that are alive and arms that are only shaped like it. And Hikaru knew, and he would not tolerate the clones, and so I dismissed them and did everything myself, which is how I came to be digging a well one-handed, while a 4-month-old screamed against my collarbone. I dig a good well. Best well in the world, probably. Took me 9 minutes. It did not help. The roof is the thing that breaks me. Not literally, the roof is fine, the roof is excellent, I built it. The problem is that Hikaru laughs now, and when Hikaru laughs, weather happens. I do not know why. I have theories. He is Gentas and Emma's, ordinary human stock. No magic in either of them that I could read. But he spent his first hours in an oak chest inside a strike from the sky that unmade 40 blessed men, and I have come to believe that something of that strike soaked into him, the way the smell of smoke soaks into cloth, and that it comes out of him now in moments of strong feeling, which for a baby means constantly and without warning. When he laughs, wind comes, small at first, a gust, the washing off the line. Then, one morning, I made a face at him. I have learned 3 faces that make him laugh, and I deploy them like weapons, because a laughing baby is not a crying baby, and he laughed so hard he got the hiccups, and a hurricane took the eastern wall off the house. Not a metaphor, the wall. A section of stone I had set myself, torn out and thrown 30 paces up the valley by a wind that came from nowhere, and stopped as soon as the hiccups did. So now I patch the house with magic, every day. I raise the wall in the morning, and sometime in the day, Hikaru feels something strongly, and the wall goes, and I raise it again before he notices it is gone, because if he notices the house is broken, he cries, and if he cries, the weather gets worse, and if the weather gets worse, the house breaks more. It is the hell logic exactly. The wall comes down at dawn, so you rebuild it before dawn. 2,000 years of practice for this, it turns out, for a nursery. A sneeze took out the well house. He sneezed one small wet sneeze, and there was a crack like the world clearing its throat, and the little stone shelter I had put over the well was simply gone, powdered, and Hikaru looked deeply surprised at himself. And then, thank every god I do not care for, he did not cry. He laughed. And the wind came, and I caught the wind on a barrier before it took the roof, and I stood there holding a shield against my own son's amusement, and I thought, this is the most dangerous thing in either world, and it weighs as much as a sack of flour. I cannot feed him. I want to be clear about the depth of this failure. I can hunt anything that walks or flies or swims. I brought down a thunder dragon, but a 4-month-old does not eat dragon. A 4-month-old eats milk, and I do not have milk, and I did not, in the first terrible days, even know that this was the shape of the problem. I solved it badly, and then better. Badly, I went, at night, in a shape that was not mine, to a farm a day's ride out, and I bought a goat. I paid for it, rules are rules. I left 3 coppers weighted under a stone, though the price was 1, because I took it while the farmer slept and did not want to be a thief even in his eyes. But the first goat gave milk for a week and then dried to nothing, and I did not understand why until the farmer's neighbor, unwitting, explained to a stranger in the market that a doe stops milking if you take her from her kid. So I went back and bought a nanny with her kid still at heel, so the milk would keep coming, and as Hikaru grew and drank more, I bought a second and then a third, until I was keeping a small herd in a valley for 1 small human. The goats give milk. Hikaru will drink goat's milk from a cloth teat if I warm it against my own hand to the temperature that does not make him scream, which is a narrower temperature than you would think, and which I now judge by instinct, the way the old woman judged the heat on a skewer. Better. I learned to keep the goats alive, which meant learning that goats also have needs, which meant that I was now keeping several living things alive in a valley, and that all of them were completely dependent on a creature that had spent 2,000 years being depended on by no one and depending on nothing. I made a chart. On the inside wall, in charcoal, things Hikaru needs: milk, sleep, dry cloth, the 3 faces, a thing I have named burping, which I discovered by accident, and which is somehow the most important discovery of my new life. I add to the chart every day. It is the longest document I have ever written, and none of it is about killing anything, and I am, in a way I cannot explain, proud of it. I have not slept. I want to be precise because it matters for what comes next. Demons do not sleep. We do not need to. But we can, if we choose. And I had never chosen to, in 2,000 years. Because sleep is a decision to be defenseless, and I had never once in either existence been safe enough to be defenseless. And here's the thing I did not expect. I was tired. Not the old wariness of hell, a real tiredness in the body of a kind I had never carried in 2,000 years. I have come to believe it is the human world doing it to me, the thinning of the demonic thing that kept me endlessly awake, worn down further by a labor I had never once performed, the specific, grinding, ceaseless labor of keeping a small helpless thing alive by the hour. Hell demanded vigilance. It never demanded tenderness at 3 in the morning. That is a different muscle, and I had never had it, and using it for the first time exhausted me in a way that 10,000 mornings of rebuilding a wall never had. By the 40th day, I understand why humans sleep. It is not only the body, it is the mind. The mind must be allowed to stop, or it begins to slide, and I felt it sliding not toward cruelty this time, but toward error, toward warming the milk wrong, toward forgetting the chart, toward the small failures that are more dangerous to a baby than any army. So on the 41st day, against every rule I have, I sat down against the mended eastern wall with Hikaru asleep on my chest, and I let myself close my eyes for what I told myself would be a moment. I slept. For the first time in 2,000 years, I slept, and that is when the goblins came. There are goblins in the hills west of the valley. I knew this. I had accounted for it. My barrier holds against anything living that means harm, that is the shape of the ward, keyed to intent, and goblins mean harm the way rain means wet. It is simply their weather. But the barrier is keyed to me. It is my will holding it up. And when I sleep, my will goes quiet, and I did not know that, because I had never slept, and there is no line in 2,000 years of building walls that reads what happens to the wall when the builder is unconscious. The wall went quiet with me. I do not know how long they were in the house. I know I woke because my chest was cold. That is the sensation that dragged me up out of the first sleep of my existence, not a sound, not a blow, but the absence of a small warm weight that had been there when I closed my eyes. The chest was open. The oak chest, the one I had kept out of some instinct I could not name, the one Hikaru had been born again inside. I keep him in it to nap because it is the one place he sleeps without weather. It was empty. I have felt fear before. I want to say that clearly, so you understand the difference. In hell, fear is constant and low, and it is about yourself, about the wall coming down, about the teeth in the wind. I had 2,000 years of that fear, and it had worn a groove in me so deep I did not feel it anymore. This was not that. This was a fear with a bottom that dropped out of it. This was the empty chest and the cold on my chest and the understanding, arriving all at once, that I had done the one thing I swore on my own soul I would not do. I had lost him. I had slept. I had been defenseless, and it was not me that paid. It was him. It was always going to be him. That is what the oath means, and I had learned it in the worst possible way in the first 41 days. I did not bring the sky down. I want that on the record. Every part of the old thing in me wanted to unmake the hills and everything in them until Hikaru was the only living thing for 100 miles, and I did not, because a strike from the sky does not care what it hits, and somewhere under it might be a small warm weight. And I could not risk the strike, and so for the first time the power that made me was worse than useless. I ran, on foot, following goblin sign through the dark like any tracker, like any frightened father, no different, no better. I found them at the tree line. And they were dead. Not by me. I had not touched them. There were 6 goblins and they were dead in the leaf mold with the neat economy of a professional throats, mostly 1 arrow, no wasted motion. The work of someone who had done this a great many times and did not enjoy it, and did not enjoy it either. And standing over them, holding Hikaru, who was awake and calm and not crying, was a woman. She was travel-worn and sharp-featured, and she held him correctly better than I did. That first month with the automatic competence of someone whose hands knew the shape of a child, even if her face said she wished they did not. She had a bow across her back, and a scout's leathers and a brand on her wrist that I would learn to read later. She looked at me coming out of the dark, and she did not flinch, which told me a great deal about her, because I was not wearing a face that first instant, and the thing that came out of the trees was not entirely a man. She looked at me. She looked at the child. She looked at the ward line I had thrown up around the valley. She could see it, which told me more, and at the house 2 days south with a wall that was subtly newer than the rest, and she put it together with a speed that frightened me almost as much as the empty chest had. "This yours?" she said. She lifted Hikaru slightly, not roughly, a question. "Yes." "You slept." Not an accusation, an observation, and worse for it. Wards keyed to you. "You went under and it went under. They walked right in." She looked down at the child, then back at me, and asked the question that turned my entire existence over on its axis. The question I have never fully answered, and have spent a lifetime trying to. "Are you actually his father?" I opened my mouth to say yes, and I could not. Because in that instant I saw what I had built, not the house, the valley, 2 days from anyone, a ward that let nothing in. A herd of goats and a chart, and a man who did everything himself because he could not bear to let even a clay clone hold his son. I had not built a home, I had built a hole. I had taken the one living thing I loved and I had put him at the exact center of an emptiness, alone, with a demon, because I was so afraid of losing him again that I had cut him off from every person and every warmth that might have made him worth raising. I had become the thing I fled. I do not talk about my own father. But I fled him once, across 2,000 years, and here I was, 2 days from anyone, keeping a child in a chest inside a hole, telling myself it was safety. "No," I said. "I don't know what I am, but I'm trying to be." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stepped over the dead goblins and put Hikaru into my arms correctly, adjusting my grip with 2 fingers, a small contemptuous mercy, and he did not cry. "Then you should know," she said, "that a hole in the ground isn't safe. It's just a hole with everything you love at the bottom of it." She walked past me toward the house, uninvited, as though she had already decided something I had not been consulted on. I followed, holding my son, wearing red gloves I finally remembered to put on, into the second worst night of my life and the beginning of the only good one. Her name was Shirasagi, and she told me no before I asked her anything. She said it the first morning, over the fire, while Hikaru drank warm goat's milk from the cloth teat, and she watched my hands do it the way a master watches an apprentice do a thing badly, but not quite badly enough to correct. "I'll stay a few days," she said, "until your ward problem is fixed. Then I go. I'm not his mother. I won't be. Understand that before you get an idea in your head, because I can see you getting it." I didn't ask. "You were going to." She was right. I was. Everyone does. Woman shows up, catches a baby, knows how to hold him. Everyone gets the same idea. So, no. I'll say it now to save us the conversation later. I let it lie. I have found that the best way to learn the shape of a person is to hand them a task and watch how they hold it, and she had already told me more by refusing motherhood than she would have by explaining herself, so I did not push. I gave her a task instead. I asked her to walk the ward line with me and tell me where a scout would come through, and she did, and she found 4 ways in that I had not considered because I had been thinking like a builder and she thought like a thief, and by noon I understood that I needed her far more than she needed me, which is a bad position to be in when you want someone to stay. It took a week to learn what she was. She did not tell me. She told me pieces, sideways, the way people tell you the truth when they have decided you are not going to be around long enough for it to matter. The brand on her wrist was a convict's mark, and she wore it uncovered, which I came to understand was its own kind of penance. She could have hidden it, and she chose not to. She had been a scout, not a common one. Elite, royal, the kind a crown keeps close and does not admit to owning. And in the last war, the same war Genta was drafted into, though neither of us made that connection out loud, and I have never told her that her war and my ash are the same war she had been ordered to strike a man in disguise. She did it. That was her whole crime and her whole competence in one act. She was given a target. The target was armored and hooded and moving with an enemy column, and she put an arrow where she was told to put it, cleanly, from a distance, and then the hood came off the dying man, and it was her own king. A rival within the court had arranged it. fed the crown false intelligence, positioned the king where a scout would take him for an enemy, used her as the weapon because a weapon does not know whose hand is on it. She never learned which noble. It did not matter. What mattered was that the king was dead by her arrow and someone had to answer for it, and the someone was not going to be a duke. They could have hanged me, she said. She was cleaning the bow while she said it, not looking at me. Would have been kinder. Instead, they convicted me and sold me. A scout's a valuable thing. Somebody bought my papers. I walked off before the collar went on. Been walking since. How long? 2 years. She snapped the bowstring taut. I put down bandits on the roads, goblins in the hills. I don't take pay for it. I just do it and move on. 6 goblins here, 12 on the pass last month. It doesn't add up to anything. It's not supposed to. She looked at me for the first time in the telling. You understand that? It's not supposed to add up to anything. That's the point. I understood it perfectly. I had spent 2,000 years building walls that came down at dawn. I know exactly what it looks like when a person has decided that the shape of their life is repetition without a rival, that you do the thing, and the thing does not fix the thing, and you do it again, forever, because to stop would be to admit that nothing is being paid down. So I told her the truth, which is a weapon I use rarely, because it is so much more dangerous than lying. That's not atonement, I said. It's cowardice. She went very still. Hikaru in the chest made a small sound in his sleep, and neither of us moved to him, because we were too busy being about to say things we could not take back. Say that again, she said, and I'll put an arrow in you and see if it takes. You kill 6 goblins and move on before anyone thanks you, I said. You put down bandits and leave before anyone learns your name. You keep the brand uncovered, but you never stay anywhere long enough for it to cost you. That's not paying. That's making sure the bill never comes. Real atonement has a face that looks back at you. It has a name. It costs you something every single morning, and you don't get to walk away from it when it hurts. I let that sit. Then, you know this. You knew it before I said it. That's why you're angry. She did not shoot me. She sat with the bow across her knees and looked at the fire for a long time, and when she spoke again it was quiet. The king I killed, she said. The one they used me to kill. You know what he did with his own coin? He ran an orphanage in the capital. He started the war's bad king, honestly. The wars were his, and he couldn't sleep for the children they made, so he built a house and filled it with the orphans of his own wars, and he paid for it out of his own hand. That's the man I put an arrow in, a bad king who was trying at the end to answer for the thing he'd made. She laughed, and it was an awful sound. I killed the one man in that court who was trying to answer for anything. Then answer for him, I said. Not with goblins on a road, with orphans. The thing he couldn't finish, you finish it. That's a face that looks back. That's a bill that comes every morning. I told you, she said. I'm not a mother. I'm not asking you to be his mother. I gestured at Hikaru, asleep in the oak chest. I'm asking you to help me not build a hole with him at the bottom of it, and then more than him. Because you're right, one child in a valley isn't safe. He needs others, other children. A place with more than one warm thing in it. And I don't know how to make that. I know how to make walls. I don't know how to make a place people want to be. I looked at her. You do. You just spent 2 years walking away from every place you might have made. Stop walking. She did not answer that night. She answered 3 days later, and she answered in the form of a demand, which I have since learned is how she agrees to things. She never says yes. She only ever presents you with the terms under which she has decided not to say no. If I stay, she said, we do it properly, not you and a servant. Not you and a guest who catches your baby when you fall asleep. I've been owned once. I walked off before the collar went on, and I am never, in either of our lives, wearing one again. She set a knife on the table between us. So, equal contract, a service bond, both ways. You bind to me, and I bind to you, the same words, the same instant, both of us master and both of us servant. Neither one able to betray the other, neither one able to command the other into a thing they'd refuse. If I'm chained, you're chained to the same wall. I have made contracts. In hell, contracts are the only law, and I am very good at reading the trap inside the offer. There was no trap. That was the astonishing thing. She was not trying to bind me down. She was trying to make sure I could not bind her. A mutual bond, seals set in the same breath, is the only kind that cannot be turned into ownership. Because the moment it exists, neither party has a lever over the other. You cannot order a person who can order you back. and you cannot betray a person whose betrayal returns to you in the same instant. It was the contract of two people who did not trust each other and were both correct not to. You understand what you're binding to, I said, because she deserved the chance to refuse. You've seen the ward, you've seen the wall I mend every morning. You haven't seen the worst of what I am, and I'm asking you to bind your soul to it without seeing it. I know you killed 6 goblins would have been faster to kill than to walk past, she said. I know you keep a chart of a baby's needs on your wall like it's siege orders. I know you paid 3 coppers for a 1 copper goat and left them under a rock, she looked at me. I don't need to know the worst of you. I've met men whose best was worse than your worst. Set the seal. We set the seal. Both at once she counted us down. 3, 2, 1. The way you'd count 2 archers to loose together, and the words went out of us in the same breath, and the bond took hold in the same instant. And for a moment I felt her the way you feel a wall you have just raised. A new thing standing where there had been open air, load-bearing, real. Master and servant, both ways, neither able to make the other kneel. Hikaru woke up and cried, because the goat's milk had gone cold while we were binding our souls together, and we both moved for him at once, and knocked heads, and that is the truth of how our family began. Not a wedding, a contract, a cold bottle, and 2 idiots cracking skulls over a screaming child. A household is a slow thing to build. It does not happen the way a wall happens, all at once, on will. It happens in the accumulation of small negotiated defeats, and over the following weeks we accumulated a great many. She fixed the ward. Her solution was so simple I was ashamed I had not seen it. I had keyed the ward to my will, so it slept when I slept, and she pointed out that there were now 2 of us, and 2 people do not sleep at the same instant if they agree not to. So we key the ward to both. When I sleep, it holds on her will. When she sleeps, it holds on mine. The first night I slept knowing the wall would hold without me was the first night I understood, in my body, the thing I had been saying with my mouth, that safety is not a wall you build alone. It is a second person awake while you are not. She taught me to warm the milk by feel, and I taught her the 3 faces, and she deployed a 4th face I did not know I had, and Hikaru laughed at it and took the eastern wall off the house again, and she looked at the wind-thrown stone and then at me and said flatly, "We are not raising this child in a house he can level with a giggle. Build somewhere he can be loud." And that, small as it was the first brick of everything that came after the understanding that we needed room. Not a house, room. A place large enough that a child's joy could not knock it down. She did not love Hikaru that first month. She was honest about it, and I respected the honesty. She held him well because her hands knew how. She fed him and changed him, and she did not once smile at him, and she told me plainly that she was doing a job, that the smiling was not in the contract, and I let it be, because I have learned that you cannot order a person into warmth, and that the warmth arrives, if it arrives, on its own schedule, from the side, when no one is watching for it. I watched for it anyway. It arrived on the night of a fever. Hikaru's, his first, and I did not know a body could burn like that and live. And I was 1 heartbeat from doing something enormous and stupid. And she put her hand flat on my chest and said no, not with force, with the calm of a person who had seen fever before. And she sat up the whole night with him against her, in the light of the fire, singing something under her breath, a real song, a lullaby, the kind a bad king might have paid to have sung in an orphanage, and when the fever broke near dawn, she was still singing it. And she did not stop when she saw I was awake, and she did not pretend she had not been. She never said she loved him. She still, to this day, will not say it. But that morning she stopped saying she was not his mother, and I understood that with Shirasagi the space where a word should be is the word. It was 3 people now. A demon, a criminal, and a child who had no idea what either of them was, and drank his goat's milk, and laughed his weather, and slept in an oak chest, and was, by every measure I could invent for my chart, content. I thought that was the destination. I want to record that clearly, because it is the last time in this whole story I mistook a stopping place for an arrival. I thought, I have a house, and a wall that holds when I sleep, and a woman bound to me who will not betray me, and a son who is safe. I thought the shape was finished. I thought I could stand and look at it the way you look at a wall that for once has survived the dawn. Shirasagi took that away from me on an ordinary evening, cleaning her bow, not looking up, in the same flat voice she used for everything true. "You know this can't hold," she said. "The ward holds. You said yourself." "Not the ward." She set the bow down. "Us. This. 3 people in a valley." She looked at me, and there was no cruelty in it, which is what made it land the way it did. "The men who burned that village of yours, they found 200 people, and it didn't cost them anything. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody came asking. 200 people can vanish and the world doesn't notice the whole. You think 3 is safer than 200? She let that sit. One family isn't safety. It's one target, a small one, the kind that's easiest of all to erase. I did not answer her. Because she was right. And because in her being right, I felt the entire shape of my old existence rearrange itself into something new, not the hell logic of the wall that falls at dawn, but its opposite, its cure, arriving all at once the way the fear had arrived over the empty chest. You do not survive by being unkillable. I had been effectively unkillable for 2,000 years, and it had not saved a single person I cared about, because the killing had never been aimed at me. You survive by being too large to erase. A village of 200 vanishes and no one notices. But a city of tens of thousands, of hundreds of thousands, woven into the roads and the trade and the treaties of the continent, a city cannot be touched without waging war on half the world, and half the world does not go to war to please a church. We're not going to hide, I said slowly, testing the shape of it. We're going to build something so big they can't afford to burn it. Shirasagi looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked her bow back up, and I saw, just barely, the corner of her mouth do a thing it did not usually do. Now that, she said, is worth staying for. 2 years passed, and I will tell you about them quickly, because they were the good years, and good years do not make a story. Hikaru learned to walk, which meant Hikaru learned to fall, which meant the valley learned about weather. He learned to talk, and his first word was not father, it was go. Go is a dragon. He came to us in the second year, in an egg I had not asked for and could not turn away. A thunder dragon's egg, storm blue, warm to the touch, that Shirasagi found in a raided nest on one of her old roots and brought home because, she said, it was going to hatch whether we wanted it to or not, and she was not going to leave a live thing to die out of principle. It hatched 3 weeks later into a creature the size of a cat that immediately attached itself to Hikaru and would not be separated, and the two of them grew up tangled together, a boy who made weather and a dragon who was made of it. Go was insufferable even then. Proud, loud. He learned to make a small crack of thunder when he was pleased with himself, which was constantly. I did not connect it, at first, that the dragon I had hunted in the mountains and the egg Shirasagi found were of the same kind. When I did, I said nothing. Some circles you do not point at, you just let them close. So it was 4 now, a demon, a criminal, a boy, and a dragon. And I was building slowly, carefully, on the model Shirasagi had given me, not a house, but the beginnings of room, foundations laid wide against a future I could see the shape of, but not yet the size. Then one afternoon while we were both away, they came for go. I had gone north for stone. Shirasagi had gone west, tracking a raiding pattern she did not like the look of. We left Hikaru inside the ward 3 years old now, safe behind a wall keyed to both our wills, and we left Go with him, because they could not be separated without both of them shrieking. It was Go they wanted. I have pieced it together since. A warlord named Raymond ran the hills 2 valleys west, a real warlord, not bandits on a road, 300 people under him and half of them armed. He dealt in things that could be sold, and a thunder dragon hatchling can be sold for more than a warlord sees in a year. His scouts had found the valley. They could not cross the ward with harmful intent, but a child does not understand a ward, and a child who wants his friend to be safe will take his friend outside the wall to hide him. That is what Hikaru did. I do not know what they told him. Something. A scout in the tree line, a lie sized for a 3-year-old, and Hikaru, who could not yet cross the ward himself because it did not read a child's fear as harm and would not open for him, did the thing that turned my blood to water when I understood it later. He broke the ward from the inside. He was afraid. Truly afraid. For Go. And the fear came out of him the way his laughter came out of him, as weather, as force, and it hit the wall I had keyed to 2 souls, and it went through. Because I had warded the valley against everything living that meant harm, and it had never once occurred to me to ward it against the boy at its center. He tore a hole in his own father's barrier with the same power that made the crater at Misono, and he carried a screaming dragon out through the hole to hide it, and Raymond's men took them both. We came back to a broken ward and an empty valley, and I did not sleep and I did not eat, and I do not require either, but I want it recorded that I would not have done them anyway. Shirasagi read the sign in the time it took me to lose my mind. 3 years old, dragging a dragon, no struggle at the tree line, went willingly, then didn't. 6 men. Horses, west. She said it flat and fast, and it was the flatness that held me together, because I could feel the old thing rising, the strike from the sky thing, and a strike from the sky does not care what it hits, and my son was somewhere under wherever it would fall. "You can't burn it down," she said, reading my face the way she read leaf mold. "He's inside. Whatever you're about to become, he's inside it. So you're going to be a man for the next day. Can you do that?" "Be a man for one day?" "No," I said honestly. "Then be my weapon," she said. "I'll aim you." We went west. Raymond's stronghold was an old mining fort, stone, dug into a hillside, good ground, defensible, the choice of a man who had survived long enough to learn caution. 300 people inside, 180 of them fighters. The rest were workers, and I saw as we scouted the wall that the workers were slaves' brands, collars, the whole ugly apparatus, smiths and diggers and haulers, families among them, children. And I saw Hikaru. He was in a holding pen with the dragon egg stock and the other valuable things, and he was not being harmed because harmed goods do not sell, and he was fighting anyway. 3 years old, in a cage, throwing himself at a full-grown fighter who was trying to take Go out of his arms, and losing, obviously, completely, and getting up, and losing again, and getting up again. And I have brought the sky down on 40 men, and I have never seen anything as brave as my son losing a fight he could not win, and refusing to understand that he had lost it. There was a girl in the next pen. I clocked her without meaning to, the way you clock a thing that is wrong. Young, maybe 10, and she had wings, dragon wings, folded tight against her back and bound with iron, and I understood at a glance what she was, not a slave they'd taken, but a weapon they'd made. Raised in the pen, trained to it. She watched Hikaru fight and get up and fight and get up with an expression I could not read then and understand entirely now. She was watching someone refuse to accept a cage, and she had never once in her life considered that this was a thing a person could do. Her name was Yuzuki. I did not learn it that day. But I remember her face from that day, and I have spent a long time being glad we came. Here is the problem Shirasagi solved, because it is important that you understand it was Shirasagi who solved it and not me. I could not fight my way in. Not because I couldn't win, I could unmake the fort and everyone in it, but because everyone in it included Hikaru, and 180 fighters, and 300 slaves, and if I came in as the thing I am, some of the wrong people die. And more than that, Shirasagi said the thing that became the spine of everything after. "If word gets out that 2 people took this fort," she said, crouched in the dark below the wall, "we're finished. A demon and a scout wipe out a warlord. That's a story the church can use. That's a monster with a handler. You don't win this by winning it big. You win it small. You win it so it looks like an accident." So she went in alone, loud, as a decoy. I want to describe what she did because it was the most skilled thing I have ever watched a person do, and none of it was strength. She walked up to Raymond's gate in the open, in daylight, and she announced herself as a lone bounty scout come for the dragon stock, and she was insulting about it, deliberately, the arrogance of someone who thinks she cannot be touched. Raymond came out to enjoy killing her, and she fought his men badly, on purpose. She spent spell after spell, flashy, wasteful things, fire and light and noise, burning her reserves in front of him so that he could see, so that he could count, so that he could do the arithmetic every warlord does. How much has she got left, and when does she run dry? She let him watch her run dry. She fought until she was staggering, until her spells guttered, until she looked like a scout who had overreached and was about to die for it. And Raymond, a careful man, a survivor, a man who had lived by never overcommitting, made the one aggressive decision of the encounter, because she had convinced him it was safe. He unleashed a wide area spell. His finisher. The big one warlords keep for the moment they're sure, because it empties them too, and they only use it when they cannot lose. He was sure. He had counted her down to nothing. He loosed it. And Shirasagi, who had not been running dry at all, who had been spending cheap, flashy nothing spells and holding her real reserve untouched behind a decoy of exhaustion, stepped inside the wide arc of a spell aimed at where she'd been standing, came up behind him in the half-second his own working blinded him, and put a paralytic needle in the side of his neck. He dropped, whole, alive. Paralyzed from the neck down and entirely conscious, which she told me later was deliberate, that a man who is going to lose everything should be awake to lose it. The needle holds the paralysis for a day long enough, she said, to bind him and decide what came after, because the point was never to cripple him, only to take him off the board without a corpse. The wide area spell hid an empty patch of yard and a decoy that was already gone. His men stood there and did the new arithmetic. The scout is fine, the warlord is down, and neither of those things is supposed to be possible. In the space of that confusion, I opened Hikaru's pen quietly, from the side, one wall, no sky, no crater, and had my son and his dragon in my arms before the fighting had properly registered that it was over. What was left was 180 fighters, 300 workers with families, one paralyzed warlord, and a decision. Shirasagi came to me in the yard with Raymond slung over her shoulder like a sack, and Hikaru already healing the split lip of the very man who had been trying to take go from him, reaching up, 3 years old, pressing his small hand to the fighter's bleeding mouth and closing the cut, because that is a thing Hikaru could do that I still do not fully understand. And because to Hikaru, a fight that is over is a fight that is over, and the next thing you do is take the hurt away. "We can't kill them all," Shirasagi said, "and we can't leave them, they'll scatter, and every one of them will tell the story we can't afford." 180 armed men who watched one scout drop a warlord. She looked at me. "And 300 slaves with nowhere to go. What do we do with 300 slaves, Jingen? Free them into what? The hills? The roads? They'll be recaptured by next month. Freedom isn't a gate you open. It's a place you put people." And I started to laugh. She has told me since that it frightened her, the way I laughed, and I believe her because I frightened myself. It was not the hell laughter, the thing that comes before a crater. It was the opposite. It was the sound a man makes when a problem he has been carrying for 2,000 years turns inside out in his hands and becomes its own solution. "You said it yourself," I told her. "One family is one target. 200 people vanish and no one notices. We need to be too big to erase." I looked at the yard, 180 fighters, 300 workers, smiths, diggers, haulers, a girl with bound wings, families, children. A whole population, armed and skilled and homeless and afraid, standing in the ruin of the only order they had known. It's easier to increase the number of allies than to decrease the number of enemies. They tried to sell your son. Some of them, under a man who's paralyzed in a sack. I looked at the fighter whose lip Hikaru had just healed, who was staring at the small hand on his face like it was a thing from another world. The rest were slaves, and the fighters are men who joined a warlord because a warlord fed them, which is the only reason anyone ever joins a warlord. I'm not going to forgive them. Forgiveness isn't mine to give, it belongs to a village that isn't here to give it. But I can do something better than forgive them. I raised my voice so the yard could hear it. I can give them work. I did not free them into the hills. Shirasagi was right that freedom is a place, not a gate. I offered them the place I was going to build, not pardon a role. Wages, walls. A wall keyed so no one inside gets sold, and a demand in exchange, that they build it with their hands, the thing that would make sure no one ever did to them what had been done. The fighters I did not pretend to trust. I told them plainly they'd be watched, that trust was a thing they'd earn by the year, not the day. Most of them wept, which surprised me, until I understood that a man who has been a weapon his whole life weeps the first time someone offers him a wall to build instead of a wall to storm. Ryman himself I did not kill, because killing him made a martyr and keeping him made a lesson. When the paralysis wore off the next day, we had him bound, and I bound him further, a soul contract against the trade in people, the one crime his whole life had been built on, so that the thing that made him a warlord was simply no longer available to him. He did not weep the way his men did. He worked, sullen at first, and then merely quiet, hauling stone under a contract he could not break, and he lived out his years in the city as one more man who had once been something worse, which is a lesson a great many people learned from watching, and the only revenge the slaves he'd kept ever asked for. 300 workers, 180 fighters, one warlord I did not kill. The bound-wing girl, I unbound myself, and she flinched from my hands, and Hikaru walked over to her and offered her go to hold, and she held the dragon and did not fly away, and that was the beginning of Yuzuki, though neither of us knew it. My first crew. 480 people who had woken up that morning as slaves and slavers and gone to sleep as the founding population of a thing that did not have a name yet. Shirasagi stood beside me looking at them, and at Hikaru moving through the wounded, taking pain away, and at the impossible size of what I had just committed us to. "You know," she said, "when I said too big to erase, I meant eventually." "We're behind schedule," I said. That night, for the first time, I did not mend a wall. I laid a foundation, a real one, wide, meant to hold weight it did not yet carry, on ground I had not yet earned, for people who did not yet trust me. I laid it in the dark with 480 strangers watching a demon they did not know was a demon build the first stone of the thing that would, in the end, be too large for the whole continent to touch. Hikaru fell asleep against Go in the ruined pen, safe, in the middle of the largest number of people he had ever been surrounded by, and he did not make any weather at all. I understood that this was the answer, not the wall that holds when I sleep, the crowd that holds when I fall. You do not build a city on land you do not own. I learned that the hard way, which is to say I learned it from a woman with a scroll and a headache. 480 people camped in a warlord's abandoned fort are not a city. They are a problem waiting to be noticed, and we were noticed within the season because 480 people eat, and eating means buying, and buying means a stranger's coin appears in 3 market towns at once, and a clerk somewhere writes it down. Word climbed the ladder the way word does. And at the top of the ladder was a queen with a problem of her own, which is the only reason we got what we got. Her name was Tsumugi, and I did not meet her the way you meet a queen. I met her the way you meet a transaction. The church had come to her. This much I assembled later. From Madoka, from the shape of the offer. Somewhere in a marble hall, the Holy Church had presented the crown of Tawano with a demand. A mage had killed 40 of the blessed, a full detachment, a strike from the sky, and the church wanted him. Produce the mage, hand over the monster. And Tsumugi, who was young and cool, and ruled a court full of nobles who each thought they ruled her, did the arithmetic that queens do. If she handed the church a mage, she admitted the church could reach into her kingdom and take what it wanted. If she refused outright, she gave the church a reason for a crusade she could not afford. She needed a third door. She needed to make the mage into someone she could not be asked to hand over a subject, a title, a piece of her own machinery, and she needed to do it in a way that also injured a rival. The rival was the crown of Maise, the kingdom next door, the one she'd fought the last war against. There was a stretch of forest on the border called Kurugai, worthless land, too wet to farm and too dense to log profitably, claimed by both crowns and wanted by neither, a place they fenced over out of habit. If Tsumugi granted that forest to a new-made noble of Tawano, she planted a subject squarely in the ground Maise claimed, and she made the church's monster into a lord she was obliged by her own law to protect, and she did both with a single stroke of a pen that cost her nothing. So I was ennobled, not for heroism, not for merit. I was ennobled because I was a convenient way for a queen to insult 2 enemies at once, and I have never resented it, because it is the most honest reason anyone has ever done anything for me. The grant came with a forest no one wanted and a woman I did not ask for. Madoka, she said. She did not offer a hand. She offered a scroll. Royal official, I'm here to observe you, report on you, and prevent you from embarrassing the crown that just gave you a title it already regrets. You'll find I'm thorough. She was small, precise, and she spoke the way a good knife cuts no wasted motion, no warmth wasted either. She had been sent to watch me. A spy in plain terms, with the crown's seal to make the spying legal. Shirasagi took one look at her and said, later, in private, "That one's a scout too. Different kind. Watch what she writes down, not what she says." Shirasagi was right, as she was about most people, but she was right about the wrong danger. Madoka was watching me for the crown, yes. But Madoka was also, I came to understand over the following months, watching me the way a person watches a thing they have decided is probably going to fail interestingly. She expected to write a report about a mad mage who could not govern a forest. She did not expect to become the person who governed it. We moved 480 people to Kurugai, and the first enemy was not an army. It was the land itself, no water. The forest was wet, but wet is not the same as drinkable standing marsh. Tannin black, foul, the kind of water that gives 400 people the flux inside a week. I dug wells, and the wells came up brackish because the water table was fed by the marsh. So I did the thing I am good at. I went up the mountain that shouldered the forest to the north, found the clear cold stream that fed the marsh from above, and I built an aqueduct stone channel, gravity-fed, running clean water down the slope and into the settlement before it could go foul in the swamp. Clean water solved, and it solved a thing the marsh could not corrupt, because the water arrived before the marsh could touch it. No food. Marsh soil is dead soil for grain waterlogged, sour, the manna in it thin and unstable. I should explain. For those who did not grow up in this world, the earth here holds mana the way it holds water, and a healthy field holds it steady, but marsh mana is unstable. An unstable ground grows crooked and small and unpredictable, no matter how well you plant it. So I planted an elm, not an ordinary elm. A demon elm, grown from my own working, a tree with roots that reach down and stabilize the mana of the soil around it, the way an ordinary tree's roots stabilize the physical soil against erosion. One elm steadied a field, a ring of them steadied a district. Behind the elms, the ground went from sour to fertile in a season, and we drained the near marsh and planted, and I want to be honest that this was the first thing I built that Teshu Korea would later look at and grudgingly not tear down. No housing, 480 people and winter coming. This was the thing I was born to do. I made clones from the drained marsh clay, 4, then 8, then 16 as I learned to hold more, and I laid a residential district at the rate of roughly a district a week. Row houses, tight, warm, stone. The former slaves moved into houses with doors that locked from the inside, which several of them had never had, and one of them, Koharu, a woman who'd been foreman material her whole life without anyone letting her be a foreman, walked through her front door, closed it, opened it, closed it again, and then found me, and asked, flatly, whether she could organize the mason crews, because I was, in her words, doing it in an order that only makes sense to someone who's never had to live in the thing while it's half built. She was right, I gave her the crews. She became the voice of everyone who had arrived with nothing, and she was merciless about it, and the city is better built for her mercilessness. No money. This was the one I could not conjure. I can make walls out of clay, but I cannot make coin out of nothing, and 480 people need coin that comes from outside, because a settlement that only spends is a settlement that dies. So I built a road, a real one, drained and stoned, cutting through the forest to the trade route, and I set teleport delivery anchors at both ends. Paired stones I could key so that goods set on one arrived at the other, which meant Kurugai could move cargo faster than any caravan on the continent. And that brought Sakaki. Sakaki was a merchant, which is to say Sakaki was a man who could smell a margin from 3 provinces away. He arrived within a month of the road opening, uninvited, and he did not want to buy anything, and he did not want to sell anything. He wanted to lend. He looked at the teleport anchors, a delivery that arrived the same day it left, and he did the arithmetic that only a certain kind of mind does, and he offered me a line of credit against the future trade of a city that did not exist yet. "You've got the fastest freight on the continent and no money to run it," he said. "I've got money and no freight. This is not complicated. I front you the working capital. You move goods for the merchants I introduce. I take a cut of the margin, not the principal. I want you profitable, not indebted. Because a debtor who dies owing me nothing is a bad investment, and a partner who thrives owing me a percentage is an annuity." He looked around at the half-built district. "I don't care what you are. Half the continent says you're a monster. I say you're the best return I've seen in 20 years. Both can be true. I have met many men who wanted to use me. Sakaki was the first who wanted to use me in a way that also made me rich, and I have found that this is the most reliable form of loyalty. There is not love, not fear, but a man whose fortune rises and falls with yours." I took the credit. The freight ran. Coin came in from outside, and Kurugai stopped being a settlement that only spent. Wells, then aqueduct. Elm, then fields. Clones, then a district a week. Road, then anchors, then Sakaki's credit. In under a year, 480 people became 800, then 1,200, as word of a place with clean water and locking doors and paying work climbed the same ladder that had first betrayed us. I stood on the aqueduct one evening and looked at it and thought, for the second time in my life, that I understood the shape of the thing. And then Teshu Korea arrived and told a demon no. He was old, even then 60, weathered, hands like tree root, and he walked into my settlement uninvited the way Sakaki had, except that Sakaki had come to make money and Teshu had come to be furious. He did not introduce himself. He walked up to the wall I was proudest of, the district wall, a beautiful thing, 100 paces of fitted stone I had raised in an afternoon on my own mana, and he put his hand on it, and he closed his eyes, and he made a sound of such profound disgust that I thought he was ill. "Who raised this?" he said. "I did. With magic. Yes." He turned around and looked at me, and he was not afraid of me, which by then I had come to notice was the trait shared by everyone I would end up trusting. "Then it's already dead," he said. "You just haven't buried it yet." I did not understand him, and I said so, which is a thing I have learned to do more since Hikaru, to say I do not understand, out loud, to a person who does. He explained it to me in the plainest, cruelest, most correct terms anyone has ever used with me. "You raised this wall on your will," Teshu said. "It stands because you hold it standing. Not the stone's fine. You said it well, I'll give you that. But the binding, the load paths. The thing that makes 100 paces of stone into a wall instead of 100 paces of rocks stacked hopefully. That's your magic. That's you." He rapped it with his knuckles. "So tell me, mage, what happens to this wall the day you're distracted? The day you're grieving, or asleep, or 3 valleys away, or dead? What happens to the 20,000 people you're going to put behind it? I had no answer, because I had already learned this exact lesson once a ward keyed to my will sleeps when I sleep, and goblins walk in and take my son, and I had learned it about a barrier and somehow, idiotically, not generalized it to a wall. It falls, I said. It falls, he agreed, on top of them. And you'll have built the biggest tomb on the continent and called it a city, he spat. I've spent 40 years building things that outlive the men who pay for them. That's the whole job. That's the only job. A building that needs its maker alive isn't a building, it's a hostage. And a wall raised by a thing that half the continent wants dead, he looked at me flatly, is a hostage with a target painted on it. Here is the thing I want recorded clearly, because it is the moment the city became possible. For 2,000 years, no one had told me no and had it hold. In hell, no is a thing you say to a weaker creature and it means nothing. In the human world, I had power enough that no was a courtesy people extended to me and withdrew the moment I insisted. I had never, in either existence, met a person who told me I was wrong and was right and would not move. Teshu Korea told me I was wrong and he was right and he would not move, and I obeyed him. I obeyed him without argument, which I had never done, and I want to be honest that it was the hardest thing I did that entire year, harder than the aqueduct, harder than the fields. Because obeying him meant tearing down half of what I had already built, the beautiful district wall, sections of the aqueduct, the load-bearing structures I had raised on will and pride and speed. I made the founding rule of the city that afternoon, standing at the wall Teshu had condemned, and I made it out loud so that Madoka would write it down and it would be law. Anything raised by magic must stand without magic. Every wall, every aqueduct, every house I could raise it fast, with clones, with working, with power. But it had to be built so that on the day I vanished, on the day the demon was gone from the world entirely, not one stone would shift. Magic could be the scaffold, it could never be the structure. If it could not stand on its own on real foundations, real load paths, real mortared stone that a mason could point to and a mason could repair, then it did not go up. Teshu watched me tear down my own best work and rebuild it slower and heavier and duller and stronger, and somewhere in the third week of it he stopped supervising and started building alongside me, and he never once said he approved, but he stopped making the sound of disgust, which from Teshu was a standing ovation. I did not understand that year how much I had just done. I thought I was fixing a wall. I thought Teshu was a difficult old craftsman with a good point about engineering, and I incorporated his point the way you incorporate a good point, as a rule among rules. I did not understand that I had just built the thing that would, years later, save 1 million people on the day I ceased to exist, that a stubborn old man's complaint about load paths in a wet forest was the single most important decision of my entire life, and that I made it not because I foresaw anything, but because for the first time in 2,000 years, I let someone tell me no. Shirasagi found me that night, filthy, exhausted, mortar to the elbows, sitting on a wall I had built twice, once wrong and fast, once right and slow. "You look terrible," she said. "Human, almost." "An old man told me I was building tombs," I said. "Was he right?" "Yes." She sat down beside me on the wall that would stand without me, and Hikaru came running along the top of it with Go tangled in his hair and did not fall, because the wall was true. And Madoka stood below us writing something in her precise hand, and I understood that I had a forest, a title, 1,200 people, a road, a debt, a rule, and a family. And that all of it, every stone, had been built by telling me no. People came on their own, and they came for one reason, and it was true. Inside the dome, that is what they called it. Though it was not a dome, it was just the ward line I kept over the whole settlement, but the name stuck inside the dome, nobody gets killed. That was the whole recruitment pitch. I never printed a notice. I never sent a crier. The pitch was a fact, and facts travel on their own legs. There is a place in the Kurugai forest where the water is clean, and the doors lock, and the work pays, and no one has been murdered since it was founded. Not one. Not slaves by masters, nor debtors by creditors, nor the weak by the strong, because a demon holds a wall over it, and the wall does not sleep. I need to tell you about the wall not sleeping, because it is the quiet engine under everything else. Shirasagi had solved it in the Valley Key, the ward to 2 wills, so it holds on hers when I sleep and mine when she sleeps. In the city, I could not do it with 2 people, because 2 people also have to leave, have to travel, have to be 3 valleys away. So I taught it. Not the strike from the sky magic, I will never teach that. It dies with me, and good. But the ward. The wall that does not let harm in. I found that it could be keyed to a rotation of wills, ordinary people, the watch, and each of them held a corner of it on their waking shift and handed it off at the change the way you hand off a lantern. The plaiting no longer required a demon at its root, only the will of whoever held it. By the second year, there were 40 people who could hold a piece of the dome, and it never once went dark, because 40 people are never all asleep at the same instant. It was the first thing I built that did not depend on me. Teshu's rule applied to magic itself. The wall stood without its maker. I did not notice at the time how completely I had already begun preparing for a day I could not yet imagine. They came in categories, and I took all the categories. Refugees, first the ordinary displaced, war widows and burned-out farmers and the families that fall off the bottom of every kingdom, the 200 who vanish and no one writes down. I took them because they were the people Misono had been, and I had sworn a great many things over a burned village, and taking in the next Misono before it burned was the closest I could come to keeping a promise to the dead. Exiled beastmen, next the wolfkin and the horned folk and the ones with claws, driven out of human kingdoms and preyed on in their own, a people the whole continent agreed to grind down. I took them because they worked hard and asked little, and because Yuzuki, with her dragon wings, had taught me something about what a person becomes when they spend their childhood being told their body is a weapon someone else gets to hold. Elves, some the long-lived ones don't move for a human city, but the young ones did, the curious ones, the ones bored of 2,000 years of the same grove, and they brought skills we did not have and an arrogance Koharu enjoyed puncturing. And criminals, under soul contracts. This was the one Madoka fought me on, and she was right to, and I overruled her, and I want both those things recorded. A criminal under a soul contract cannot commit the crime the contract forbids, the binding simply will not permit it, the way Shirasagi and I cannot betray each other. So I offered convicts a road, come to Kurugai, take a contract that binds you against the specific violence you were convicted of, and live free otherwise. A murderer who cannot murder is a mason, a thief who cannot steal is a porter. Madoka argued it would flood us with the worst people on the continent. It did. And they built roads and hauled stone, and most of them wept the same way Raymond's fighters had wept, because it turns out the thing most criminals want most is to be somewhere their worst impulse is simply not available to them. 1,200 became 3,000, 3,000 became 6. I stopped being able to know everyone's name, which grieved me more than I expected, until I understood that not knowing everyone's name is what a city is. Koharu ran the Masons. I have told you she took the crews in the first year. By the second, she ran every Mason in the city, 400 of them, beastmen and elves and ex-slaves and ex-convicts, and she ran them the way a woman runs a thing she was never allowed to run for 40 years and is not going to waste the chance. She was merciless about quality. Teshu's rule was her scripture, stand without magic, and she failed inspection she'd have passed under any other foreman on the continent, and the walls she passed are the walls still standing. But her real work was not the stone. Her real work was being the voice of everyone who arrived with nothing. When I made a decision from the top, clean and logical and blind to the thing you only see from the bottom, Koharu came and told me flatly what it did to the people it was done to. She was the one who made me build the residential districts before the Grand Hall, the granaries before the market square, the public baths before anything I considered important, because, as she put it, you keep building for the city you're going to have and forgetting the people who have to live in the one you've got. The city belongs to its builders. Koharu made sure I never forgot that, and she made sure the builders never forgot it either, which is a harder job. Bane ran the watch, and the watch was the worst on the continent, and it was the most beloved thing in the city, and both of those are the same fact. Bane had been one of Raymond's fighters. Loud, huge, warm, the kind of man who fills a doorway and a room and a memory. When I offered Raymond's people work, he was the first to take it and the first to weep. And when I needed someone to run the watch, I chose him precisely because he had spent his whole life on the wrong side of a line and knew exactly where the line was from having stood on the far side of it. The watch he built was terrible by any professional standard. They were slow. They were sentimental. They broke up fights by buying both parties a drink. They let children ride the patrol horses. Madoka, who by now was writing the city's laws, filed a formal complaint that Bane's watch had the lowest arrest rate and the highest informal resolution rate she had ever recorded, and that informal resolution was not a legal category and she would thank him to stop writing it in the ledgers. But no one got killed, that was the thing. In a city of 6,000 refugees and beastmen and freed slaves and contracted criminals, a mix that should have been a slaughterhouse, no one got killed, because Bane's terrible sentimental watch knew every soul on their beat by name, knew whose children were whose and whose debts were whose and whose temper went bad on which nights, and stopped the killing before it started by being everywhere and loved. The best watch on the continent would have arrested more people. Bane's watch buried fewer. He stood, for the first time in his life, on the right side of a line, and he stood there so hard that the whole city leaned on him. And Yuzuki flew. The girl with the bound wings, I had unbound her in Raymond's yard, and Hikaru had handed her a dragon, and she had not flown away. In the 2 years since she had lived at the edge of the settlement, ashamed of her wings, folding them small, wearing cloaks in summer, a weapon that had been told its whole life that its body was for hurting people and did not know its body was for anything else. It was Hikaru who broke that, because of course it was. He was 5 now, and Go was the size of a large dog not yet grown enough to carry freight, and the 3 of them, boy, dragon, winged girl, had become inseparable in the way that only children and the lonely can be. And Hikaru, who healed the men he fought and hated no one and found every fact in the world equally delightful, looked at Yuzuki's wings one day and said the thing that no adult had ever thought to say to her. You could carry the mail. Not a weapon, a mail carrier. A person whose wings meant she could cross the forest in an hour that took a caravan 2 days. She launched the Dragon Air Post that season herself, and then the Beastmen with gliding kin, and eventually Go when he was grown enough to carry a satchel and insufferable enough to demand a route of his own. Letters, small freight, urgent goods, moving over a forest at a speed nothing on the ground could match. And the thing she had been ashamed of, the wings, became the emblem of the city. I did not order it. The people chose it, a pair of open wings. Because to the people who had arrived with nothing, the wings meant the thing that carried word between them. The thing that made 6,000 scattered souls into one place that talked to itself. And then she opened the first school. That was hers entirely. She came to me and said the children were growing up in a city and learning nothing but the trades of their parents, and that a weapon is a person who was only ever taught one thing, and she did not want to raise a generation of weapons. She wanted to teach them everything: letters, numbers, the biology of the 6 races living side by side, the reasons things are the way they are. I gave her a building. Koharu built it before the market square, over Madoka's objection, and it was the best objection Madoka ever lost. I want to give you one evening, because I have been giving you systems, and the systems are not the point. The systems were only ever the frame around the point. It was Hikaru's first day of school. 5 years old, walking into Yuzuki's building with a slate and Go stuffed into his shirt against the rules and against all reason, and I stood outside like every fool of a father in every world and watched him go in and not look back, because he was too happy to look back, and that undid me more than the war had. Go got into the rafters during the first lesson and would not come down and made small cracks of thunder every time Yuzuki tried to coax him, and the whole class of children, beastmen and elves and human, and one small horned girl, laughed the way Misono had laughed, the free way, the way that means nothing except that you are warm and among your own. And I stood in the doorway and listened to a room full of children laugh and did not have to catch a single hurricane, because the room was true and would hold. Shirasagi found me there. She had come from the orphanage she ran it now. The thing she'd sworn she would never touch, 3 dozen children who'd arrived with no one, and she still would not say she loved them, and she was there every morning before dawn. You're crying, she said. Demons don't cry. Then your face is leaking. She stood beside me and watched the schoolroom for a while. The children, the dragon in the rafters, Yuzuki, wings open now, unashamed, teaching. Our son in the middle of it, the happiest thing I had ever built. You did this, Shirasagi said. Not a question. The lake of blood, the crater, 2,000 years of hell, and this is what you did with it. We did it. No. She was quiet a moment. You built a shelter. In the valley, that first year you built a hole with everything you loved at the bottom of it, and I told you it wasn't safe. She nodded at the schoolroom. That's not a hole, that's a home, for thousands. She let it sit. I didn't think you had it in you. I thought you had force in you, and rules, and a dead thing where the warmth should be. I was wrong. It was, I think, the kindest thing she has ever said to me, and she said it looking at a room full of other people's children, which is the only way Shirasagi has ever known how to love anything sidelong and about someone else, and true. The problem that force cannot solve arrived in the ledgers, and I did not see it until Sakaki put it in front of me. The city grew faster than it could feed itself. That was the whole of it. 6,000 people, and the fields behind the demon elms fed maybe 4,000 of them, and the gap was closing the wrong way as more arrived every week. The forest was wet, and the good soil was slow to make, and I could not conjure grain. I can raise a wall out of clay, but I cannot raise wheat out of will. Food is the one thing that must come from the patient earth on its own schedule. Sakaki laid it out cold. You've got a port problem you don't have a port for, he said. You can't grow enough, so you buy the difference. That means buying grain from outside, in bulk, every season, forever, and it means building a river port to bring it in cheap because Dragon Post can't carry wheat by the ton. He tapped the ledger. It's a good problem. It's the problem of a city that's winning. But hear me, Jingen, because this is the one thing your wall can't fix. The day you feed your people with someone else's grain, you've handed a stranger a hand around your city's throat. And someone, somewhere, is going to notice that before we do. Someone had. 2 provinces east, a grain baron named Geno Aburaya had already run the same arithmetic Sakaki had just shown me had run it a full season earlier. In fact, sitting in a counting house I had never heard of, looking at reports of a wet forest that was suddenly buying wheat by the wagon load. He was not going to attack us. He was smarter than that. He was going to buy the harvest. Geno Aburaya never once raised his voice at me, and he is the most dangerous enemy I ever had. I want that recorded plainly, because the story likes armies and craters, and the man who nearly killed my city did it with a signature. He was a grain baron of the province 2 east of Kurugai, and he understood a thing about my city before I understood it myself. A city that eats other people's grain is a hostage that has not yet noticed the rope. He did not send soldiers. Soldiers I could have handled, and he knew it. Everyone knew what had happened to 40 of the blessed, and a man does not march soldiers at the thing that made the crater. Aburaya did the opposite of marching. He sat in a counting house and he bought the future. Here's what he did, and I lay it out step by step because the elegance of it still makes me cold. Grain in our region was sold by the guild, and the guild sold the harvest forward. You buy this year the wheat that will be reaped next year, at a price set now. It is an ordinary thing. Farmers like it because they get paid before the drought or the flood can ruin them. Buyers like it because they lock in a price. Aburaya went to the guild and bought forward, not a season, 2 years. The entire forward harvest of the whole region, every guild-registered farm within reach of Kurugai, paid for in advance, out of a fortune I had not known existed. He now owned, on paper, 2 years of the only grain my city could reach. And then he came to me not in person, he never came in person, but through a factor, a smooth man with a folio, and he made an offer that was almost kind. He would sell Kurugai all the grain it needed, at triple the going price. That was the whole trap. He did not want to starve us. Starving us was crude and made a martyr and brought a demon to his door. He wanted to feed us slowly, expensively, forever until the city's whole margin, all of Sakaki's careful profit, all the coin the road and the anchors earned, flowed out through Aburaya's granary and back into Aburaya's fortune. He wanted to own the city by owning its dinner. A city that spends everything it earns to eat is a city that can never build a wall, never dig a well, never take in the next 200 refugees. He would not kill Misono. He would keep it alive and small and paying, forever, at his price. My first instinct was the old instinct, and I am ashamed of it, and I will tell it anyway. I could find Aburaya. I could find every guild clerk who signed the forward contracts. The old thing in me laid it out with perfect clarity. A man with a signature is a man with a throat, and throats are within my reach, and a city does not go hungry if the man hoarding its bread is dead. Shirasagi watched me think it. She always knew when the old thing was rising. She said my stillness changed shape. You kill him, she said. And here's what happens. A grain baron dies mysteriously the season after he corners the market against the demon city. Every court on the continent reads that sentence and finishes it the same way. The church doesn't even need a crusade, they just need to be right, once, publicly. A demon rules Kurugai and murders the men who cross him. That's the story they've wanted for 6 years. You'd be handing it to them gift-wrapped, and Hikaru would grow up the son of exactly the monster they said you were. She was right. She was always right about this, and I had learned by now to hate that she was right and obey her anyway. So I can't punch him, I said. You can't punch him. You can't threaten him. You can't even look at him wrong. He's built himself a position where any force at all proves the thing you can't afford to prove. She almost smiled, which is why he did it. He's not afraid of the demon. He's using the demon. He's counting on you being what they say you are, because if you are, he wins twice. So I called in the people who tell me no, and we solved it 3 ways, and not one of them was force. Teshu solved the land. I told him we could not grow enough because the forest was wet and the good soil was slow, and he made his sound of disgust the small one, the affectionate one, the one that means I have said something obvious and wrong. You keep looking at the flat ground, he said. The flat ground's wet. Of course it's wet, it's a marsh. Water goes to the bottom of things. He hauled me up the shoulder of the northern mountain, the same slope the aqueduct came down, and pointed at land I had written off entirely steep, stony, useless. The kind of slope no one farms because you cannot run a plow across a hillside, and the rain washes the soil straight off it. Terraces, he said. Cut the slope into steps. Each step's a flat field with a stone lip. Water comes down. Each terrace holds what it needs and passes the rest to the one below. Drains itself. Waters itself. And it's above the marsh, so the mon is clean, no elm needed. Every province around you looked at this mountain for 100 years and saw a wall. It's not a wall, it's 100 fields stacked on top of each other, and nobody's using a single one of them. It was old knowledge. Terrace farming is ancient. It just requires a mountain and a reason, and someone stubborn enough to cut 1,000 stone lips into a slope. We had the mountain, Abariah had given us the reason, and I had 400 masons under Koharu who could cut stone lips in their sleep. We terraced the north slope over 2 seasons. It did not replace the bought grain, not at first. But it changed the arithmetic. Every terrace was a field Abariah did not own, on land his forward contracts never touched, because the guild had never registered a farm on a slope no one farmed. Yuzuki solved the speed. The terraces needed seed and fertilizer, and fast in the narrow window when planting works and not a week after. A caravan of seed grain and dung took a week to reach us over the road, and a week was the difference between a crop and a wasted season on a mountain where the weather turns. Yuzuki flew it. The dragon post carried seed to the terraces in a day, load after load, her wings and her beastmen flyers, and go grown now, insufferable, demanding his own route, moving what a caravan moved but moving it in hours instead of days, dropping it terrace by terrace up the mountain where no cart could climb anyway. She turned the mountain from a place too remote to farm into a place better supplied than the flat fields, because she supplied it from the air. The thing she had been ashamed of, the weapon they made her, was now the reason 100 stone fields got planted in the one window that mattered. And Madoka solved the market, which was the actual war, and she won it with a statute. Abariah bought the guild's forward harvest, she said, laying it out in her precise hand. Everything guild registered, but the guild doesn't own the farmers, it owns the contracts. And the small farmers, the ones with 10 acres, 20, the ones the guild treats as inventory, they hate the guild. The guild pays them a fixed low price and sells their grain forward at a markup they never see. Abariah just paid the guild 2 years in advance. The guild is flush. The small farmers got the same low price they always get. She looked up at me. So we don't fight Abariah. We root around him. Kurage is federal territory, the Queen's grant, remember, the thing she gave you to insult 2 crowns. That means we can set our own trade law inside our borders, and our law can offer to buy grain direct from any farmer who brings it to our gates, at a fixed price, higher than the guild pays them and lower than Abariah charges us. We cut out the guild entirely. The small farmer sells to us direct and earns more. We buy direct and pay less. And Abariah's 2 years of forward contracts are worth exactly nothing because he bought the guild's grain, and the guild's grain just stopped being where the grain is. It was so clean that I laughed the way I had laughed in Raymond's yard, the frightening way, the way that means a problem has turned inside out. Because it was better than beating Abariah. Beating him would have made one enemy poorer. This made 10,000 small farmers our partners. A man with 20 acres in 3 provinces who had been treated as guild inventory his whole life now hauled his grain to Kurugai, sold it at a fair fixed price, was paid the same day through Sakaki's houses, and went home richer, and he told his neighbors, and his neighbors came, and within a year, the farmland of 3 provinces was feeding my city, not because we owned it, but because it was better for them that we ate. It was the whole philosophy of the city, made into food. It is easier to increase the number of allies than to decrease the number of enemies. Abariah had tried to own the region's dinner. We had made the region want to feed us. I never saw Abariah beaten, because he was too smart to be beaten. He was routed around. His 2 years of forward grain sat in guild warehouses while the actual harvest walked past his door to my gates, and he took the loss, a large one, but he could afford a large one. He was that rich, and he did the thing the smartest enemies always do, which is that he did not double down. He read the board, saw that the position was lost and folded it, and I thought that was the end of him. It was not the end of him. It was the most dangerous thing he ever did. Because Abariah, having lost the grain war, did what a merchant of his caliber does when a position fails. He went looking for what he had missed. He had lost to a demon's city, and he was a man who did not lose, and so he wanted to know, precisely, what he had lost too. He put his fortune not into grain now, but into information factors, clerks, old soldiers, anyone who had ever been near Kurugai or near the crater or near a burned village called Misono 6 years gone. He dug where no one had thought to dig, because no one else had lost enough money to be that thorough, and he found it. Not the ward, not the walls, not the terraces, those were public. He found the thing underneath. He found a factor who had bought a 1 copper goat from a farmer years ago and been paid 3 coppers left under a stone by a stranger who traveled with a scout and a child. He found a survivor of Misono. There was one besides Joa, a girl who'd been away at market the day it burned, who described a man with red gloves who paid a toll no one asked for. He found the shape of the strike that killed 40 of the blessed, and he found a churchman, quietly, who confirmed what that strike meant, and Aburaya, sitting in his counting house with all of it laid out, understood the one fact my whole city was built to hide. The Lord of Kurugai was the demon of Misono, the kind man who paid tolls, and the thing that brought the sky down were one creature. And the wife the scout, the woman who ran the orphanage, the equal-bound partner who had built the city at his side did not know. That was the seam. Aburaya, who never threw a punch, found the one blow that force could never land. He found a truth, and he found the person it had been kept from, and he understood that he did not need to strike the city at all. He needed only to tell Shirasagi who she had married. He could not use it himself. He was a merchant, not a fanatic, and a truth is only a weapon in the hands of someone who wants a war. So he did the merchant's thing, he sold it. He took what he had found to the one buyer on the continent who had been waiting 200 years to buy exactly this, who had memorized the shape of the strike in the ash of Misono and turned obsession into an order, and the order into a church. He sold it to Cardinal Joa. And somewhere far to the west, an old excommunicate who had spent a lifetime building a case against a thing he alone had survived, finally received the 2 pieces he had been missing, the demon's name and the demon's family. I knew none of this. I was on the north slope with Teshu, looking at 100 stone terraces green with the first real crop, feeding my city with the grain of 10,000 willing farmers, thinking I had won. I had won the grain war. I had simply not understood which war it was. She did not learn it from me. That is the part I cannot forgive myself for, and I have stopped trying. She learned it from strangers men Joa sent, or men Aburaya's information reached. I never learned which, and it does not matter. 2 travelers in the market with a story to tell, and they told it near the orphanage where Shirasagi could hear, because that is where you place a knife when you want it found. The Lord of Kurugai is the demon of Misono. He burned a village once. No, that is not right, and they knew it was not right, and they told it wrong on purpose. A village burned because of him. 40 holy knights dead in a crater, and 200 farmers in the ash, and the man who made the crater sleeps every night beside the scout who runs the orphans, and she does not know what she has married. I want to be precise about what was true, because the truth is the only weapon anyone ever used on me that landed. I did not burn Misono. The church burned Misono. But Misono burned because of me, because the knights felt a demon and tracked the feeling to a village that had fed me and demanded the demon, and the village could not produce a demon it did not know it was sheltering, and so it burned. If I had not walked through that gate and paid that toll, 200 people would have lived. That is not a thing I can argue my way out of. I have tried. It does not argue, and I had never told her. 6 years. A shared seal, an equal contract, a son, a city built stone by stone at each other's side. And I had never told my wife that the ash she'd heard me speak of once was ash I had a hand in making. I told myself it was to protect her. It was not. It was the oldest reflex I have. Older than the strike from the sky. Hide the worst of yourself, because the worst of yourself is the thing that gets taken away. I had built a city to be too large to erase, and I had kept one small hidden room inside it, and Aburaya found the door and put a stranger's hand on the latch. She did not break the contract. She could not. That was the cruelty of it, and I have wondered since whether Jowa understood that when he moved, whether he knew that the bond we set in the valley, both seals in the same breath, master and servant both ways, neither able to betray the other, meant she could not walk away no matter what she learned. She was bound to me as I was bound to her, and a bond like that does not care what you find out. She could not leave. So she did the only thing a bound woman could do to make the distance she needed. She stopped speaking to me. She took Hikaru to the orphanage, not away from me exactly. He still came home, but she moved herself and her hours there, and when our paths crossed in the house or the street, she looked at me the way you look at a stone in the road, and she did not speak, and she did this for 6 weeks. I did not chase her. Every part of me wanted to. I wanted to find her and explain the shape of it, that I did not burn the village, that the church burned the village, that the distinction was real even if it did not help, and I knew, with the one piece of wisdom I have earned in this life, that explaining would be another kind of force. That a man who has hidden a thing for 6 years does not get to demand, on discovery, that the person he hid it from listen to his framing of it. The truth was hers to hold now, however she held it, for as long as she needed. My job was to let it stand naked between us and not reach for a single tool to reshape it. So I let it stand. I did not defend myself. I did not send Hikaru with messages. I did not use the contract. I could have. Technically, the bond runs both ways, and I could have compelled a conversation, and the fact that this was possible and that I refused it was the only decent thing I did in those 6 weeks. I let her not speak to me. I let the worst of myself be visible and unargued, and I kept building. Here is the thing those 6 weeks taught me, and it is the thing that mattered more than any wall. The city did not slow down. I had thought some vain, buried part of me had thought that I was the city. That Kurugai stood because I held it, the way the first wall stood because I willed it. And for 6 weeks I was hollowed out, grieving, useless in every way that counts, going through the motions of governance with the light gone out of me, and the city did not so much as stumble. Koharu ran the masons, Bane ran the watch, Yuzuki ran the school and the post, Madoka ran the law, Sakaki ran the coin, the terraces came in. The dragon post flew. The grain of 10,000 farmers walked to our gates whether or not the Lord of Kurugai could get out of bed. 6,000 people woke and worked and slept and did not get killed, and not one of them needed me to hold a wall, because I had spent 6 years building a city that stood without its maker, and now hollow, silenced, grieving, I found out that I had succeeded. It stopped being my shelter a long time ago, I realized, standing in a market I had not opened, watching a city run itself around a man who had stopped mattering to its function. I had built it to be too large for the church to erase. I had not understood that too large to erase also meant too large to need me. The two are the same fact. A thing that cannot be destroyed by the loss of one person is a thing that does not, in the end, belong to that person. That should have grieved me more. It did not. It was the most comforting thing I learned in the whole story, and I did not understand why until much later, until the day the relic fired, and the answer was already waiting in what I'd built. The aqueduct ruptured in the 6th week. Not sabotage age, water, the ordinary betrayal of stone. A section of the mountain channel let go in the night, and the break dumped the clean stream into the marsh below and cut the water to half the city. And a break like that is not a thing you fix with magic, or rather it is exactly a thing you must not fix with magic, because Teshu's rule is Teshu's rule, and an aqueduct patched with will is an aqueduct that fails again the day the will is elsewhere. It needed hands. It needed every hand that could lift stone, in the cold, in the dark, before the marsh water backed up into the wells, and the flux came for 6,000 people. I went up the mountain with the mason crews, and I worked the break, and I was setting stone in the dark, mortar freezing on my hands inside Ima's mended red gloves, when someone knelt on the other side of the channel and took the stone from my hands and set the next course. It was Shirasagi. She did not say anything. She had heard the alarm, the whole city had heard it, and she had come up the mountain in the dark with the rest of the hands, because hands were needed, and she was hands, and whatever stood between us the water did not care, and neither, in the end, did she. Not that night. That night there was a break in the thing that kept 6,000 people from the flux, and she was one of the best pairs of hands in the city, and she came. We did not talk. We worked the break side by side for the rest of the night, passing stone, setting course after course, the way we had passed a cold bottle over a screaming baby 6 years before, the way we had walked the ward line together the first day in the valley. Two people who could not betray each other, fixing a thing that had to hold without either of them, in silence, in the cold. Near dawn the water came back. I heard it before I saw it, the channel filling, the clean stream turning back into its stone bed and running down to the city, and the crews cheered, exhausted, and Shirasagi sat back on her heels beside me with mortar to the elbows and looked at the fixed break and not at me. "It held," she said. First words in 6 weeks. "Teshu built it too." "No." She looked at the stone. "You built it wrong once and fast, and he made you build it right and slow, and I watched you tear down your own best work and do it again the dull way." 6 years ago. She was quiet. "I've been sitting in that orphanage for 6 weeks doing arithmetic, on you. Trying to work out whether the man who burned a village is the same man who tore down a wall because an old man told him to. I didn't burn." "I know." Flat. Final. "I did the arithmetic." "I know what you did. and I know what the church did, and I know the difference, and I know you kept it from me, and I've decided that the keeping is the thing I'm angry about, not the ash. The ash isn't yours, the keeping is." She stood, joints cracking, an aging scout on a cold mountain. "You let me not talk to you for 6 weeks. You didn't use the contract. You didn't send Hikaru with a speech. You let it stand." She finally looked at me. "That's the only reason I came up the mountain. If you'd chased me, I'd have gone home to Rengoku and never come back. You let it stand, so I get to decide, and I've decided." "Decided what?" She wiped her hands on her leathers and looked down the mountain at the city catching the first light. The terraces green, the districts smoking with morning fires, the dragon post already lifting off the roofs, 6,000 people waking to water because 2 people who could not betray each other had set stone all night in the dark. "That I built this too," she said. "Whatever you are. I set the seal with my own hand. I ran the scouts. I built the orphanage. I dug the ward corners. This is mine as much as it's yours, and I'm not walking away from a thing I built because of who else's hands were on it." She started down the mountain. "You don't get forgiven. Get that straight. There's no conversation where I say, 'It's all right,' because it isn't all right, and I'm not the village. I can't forgive you for them. But I'm staying. Not for you. For this." She gestured at the city. "And for the boy, and because leaving would be walking away from atonement again, and I'm done doing that. You taught me that, you bastard in the valley. Real atonement has a face that looks back. This city looks back." She did not wait for an answer. She went down the mountain to the orphanage, to the children she still would not say she loved, and she was there before the other keepers as she always was. And that evening she came home and cooked and did not smile at me and set a place for me at the table, and that was the reconciliation. There was no scene. There was a set place at a table, and a woman who had decided to stay, and a boy who did not know anything had been wrong because we had both made sure he didn't. She never said it was all right. To this day, she is not. The set place at the table was the word where the word should have been, the way it always is with her. The truth was out now. Not to the city did not know, would not know for a long time, but out of its hidden room, standing in the light between me and the one person it could hurt, and survived. It was the only defeat I suffered in the whole story, and no enemy dealt it. I dealt it to myself, 6 years before, the day I decided to hide. And far to the west, the man who had bought that truth from Aburaya finished the last of his preparations. Cardinal Joa had his pretext now, and it was not the truth about Misono. That truth was too old and too tangled to move a church. His pretext was simpler and cleaner and had been waiting 6 years. A mage who killed 40 of the blessed, positively identified, ruling a growing city on federal ground, a demon lord in fact and now in proof. The church did not need the ash. It needed the crater and the name and the certainty of a man who had survived to describe it. The order went out. 4,000 blessed would march on Kurugai. I found out the way I found out everything now, not through my own power, but through the systems I had built. Yuzuki's post carried the word. Madoka read the intercepted order and understood the legal shape of it before I understood the military one. Sakaki traced the credit that was already massing to pay 4,000 men. 4,000 of the blessed marching on my city. And I could kill every one of them in a minute, which was exactly why I could not touch a single one. 4,000 blessed marched on my city, and the first thing I did was tell my people I would not fight. Not that I could not, that I would not. There is a difference, and every one of them needed to understand it, because a demon who says he cannot defend them is a coward, and a demon who says he will not is asking them to trust something harder than his power. I gathered the ones who ran the city: Koharu, Bane, Yuzuki, Madoka, Sakaki, Shirasagi, Teshu into the hall, and I laid it out with the honesty I had learned costs less than lies. "I can kill them," I said, "all 4,000, in about a minute. Some of you have seen the shape of what I can do, and the shape is not exaggerated. I let that sit. And that is exactly why I will not. The church did not send 4,000 men because they think they can win. They sent 4,000 men because they need me to kill them. A demon who annihilates a church army is the thing they've claimed I am for 6 years. The day I bring the sky down on the blessed, every court on the continent has proof, and Meisi marches, and Rengoku closes its borders, and the queen who protects us has to disown us or fall with us, and Hikaru grows up the son of a monster in a world that agrees he is one. I looked around the hall. They are not attacking the city, they are attacking my restraint. And they've built it so that my greatest weapon is the one thing that loses us the war. There was a long silence. Then Bane, who filled the doorway in the room, cracked his knuckles and grinned. "So we win it without you," he said. "Good. You're rubbish at fighting anyway. You'd feel bad about it after. That is why I love him." He made it a joke, and in making it a joke, he made it possible, and the room breathed, and we went to work. Not one piece of the defense was about power. I want that recorded above everything else, because it is the whole meaning of the city's 6 years of building, and when the test came, my hand was the least of it. Madoka fought it with a treaty. She had it out before the army crossed the first border, a scroll, 3 seals, older than the war Genta died in. Kurugai was federal territory, granted by the Crown of Tawano, sitting on ground claimed by Meisei, and under the 3-Crown Compact that ended the last war, no armed body larger than 50 could cross a federal border without the consent of all 3 crowns. The church had sent 4,000, through Tawano, toward Meisei's claimed border. Without consent of any crown at all, because the church answered to God and not to kings, and that was precisely the flaw Madoka drove her knife into. "They're not an army invading a demon," she said, spreading the compact on the table. "Legally, they're a foreign armed force violating the sovereign territory of 3 crowns simultaneously. I've already sent certified copies to all 3 courts. Tawano is obliged to respond to a violation of its own grant. Meisei can't let a church army sit on ground it claims, and Rengoku guarantees the compact." She almost smiled. "I haven't stopped the army. I've turned it from a holy crusade against a monster into a diplomatic incident that 3 kings have to be seen to answer, whether they want to or not. The church wanted this to be about God. I've made it about borders. Sakaki fought it with a ledger. 4,000 men do not march on faith. They march on grain, and boots, and remounts, and coin for all of it, and Sakaki had spent 6 years learning exactly where the church's war chest touched the merchant houses. An army's a business, he said. Worst-run business on the continent, but a business. Meisei's crown is quietly backing this march. They want the demon gone as much as the church does, and they're fronting the credit through the Aburaya houses and 2 others I've had my eye on for a year." He tapped the ledger. "So, I've spent the season buying up the paper. Every note the Meisei crown owes, every loan the war chest is drawn against. I don't have to beat their army. I have to make it insolvent. The day I call in Meisei's paper, and I've arranged it so I can call all of it at once, the crown has to choose between paying its debts and paying its soldiers. An army that isn't paid stops marching inside a week. It's not even cruel. I'm just asking for my money back at an inconvenient time. Teshu fought it with water and bridges, and not one of them could kill a man. You want them dead? Find another builder, he told me flatly. I build things that outlive their makers. I don't build things that end them. So he built the opposite of a killing ground. Moats the marsh we'd drained, reflooded on demand through the aqueduct's overflow, turning the flat approach to the city into wet ground where 4,000 armored men bogged to the knee. Bridges over the moats, engineered to collapse under weight, dropping men into water too shallow to drown in and too deep to fight in. Channels that funneled the army where we wanted it, choke points that turned 4,000 into 40 at a time, none of it lethal. All of it designed to take a marching army and turn it into 4,000 wet, stuck, exhausted, individually harmless men. Yuzuki fought it by flying the villages empty. There were settlements between the border and the city, small ones, the 200s, the kind that vanish and no one writes down. An army marches over those. So before the army reached them, the Dragon Post lifted every soul out Yuzuki and her flyers and go, running relays day and night, carrying the old and the children over the forest while the able walked the road under escort. And she did it in the open, deliberately, over the whole country, so that everyone from Tawano to Rengoku saw a winged girl and a thunder dragon evacuating villages ahead of a church army, saw who was protecting the small and who was marching on them. The wings that had been a weapon, then an emblem, became testimony written across the sky. Bane fought it by holding the pass. The army had to come through a defile in the northern shoulder to reach the moats and the bridges, and Bane held it with 200 men his watch, and Raymond's old fighters, ex-slavers and ex-slaves standing shoulder to shoulder. They did not have to win. They had to hold, and slow, and let Teshu's water and Sakaki's ledger and Madoka's treaty do their work. And Bane's men held that pass for 4 days against the Blessed, and here is the thing I will carry to the grave. They held it standing, for the first time in their lives, on the right side of a line. Men who had spent their whole existence storming other people's walls stood on a wall of their own and did not break, because the wall was theirs, and behind it were their children, and Bane moved up and down the line the whole 4 days, loud, warm, impossible, telling them they were the worst soldiers on the continent, and he'd stand with them over any other men alive. Shirasagi ran the scouts, because of course she did. She read the army the way she'd read leaf mold in the valley where it would camp, where it would ford, where its supply strung out thin, and she fed Teshu the timings for the moats and Sakaki the moment the war chest went dry, and Bane the hour the assault would come. She had struck a king in disguise once from a distance on someone else's intelligence. This time the intelligence was hers, and she aimed a whole city with it, and I fought it by refusing to kill anyone. That was my whole role. The hardest thing I have ever done, harder than the strike, harder than the 6 years of restraint that led to it, to stand in the middle of a battle I could end in a minute and choose, over and over, hour after hour, to end it slowly instead, and gently, and without a single death. When the bridges collapsed and 4,000 men went into the water, I did not drown them. I made sure the water was shallow before I let a single bridge fall. Teshu had cut the moats to a depth a standing man could keep his head above, precisely so that armor meant sinking to the waist and not to the bottom, and I walked the wet ground myself, dragging up any man the mud pinned or the current took, because 4 days of cold water in blessed steel is its own quiet killer, and I had sworn there would be no killer here at all. I disarmed them as I went, reached out and unmade the blessed steel in their hands, turned swords to slag and left the men holding warm hilts, so that 4,000 of the blessed found themselves suddenly, completely, unarmed, in water to the waist, in front of a demon who could have killed them and did not. And then I healed them, the ones Bane's men had wounded in the pass, the ones who'd broken bones in the collapsing bridges, the ones with fever from 4 days in the wet, and there were many of those, more than of any wound, because cold water takes a man slower than a blade, but it takes him just the same, and I moved through the camps at night, burning the fever out of them one body at a time. I walked the ruin of the assault, and I took the pain away, one man at a time, the way Hikaru had taught me, the way my son had knelt in Raymond's yard at 3 years old and healed the man who'd tried to steal his dragon, because a fight that is over is a fight that is over, and the next thing you do is take the hurt away. Hikaru worked beside me. 12 now, and he had insisted, and Shirasagi had let him, because she understood before I did what it would mean for 4,000 men to be healed by a demon's son who hated no one. He moved through the wet ground closing wounds, and the blessed knights watched a boy heal the men who'd come to kill his father, and asked him why, and he said what he always said, that once a fight is over, you make peace, and first you take the pain away, and he said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, because to him it was. I released every single one of them. 4,000 disarmed, healed, dry-blanketed men given road bread from our own granaries and pointed home. I did not take a hostage. I did not exact a term. I did not so much as ask their names. I opened the road west, and I let 4,000 of the blessed walk back the way they came, whole, unhurt, fed, having lost their steel and nothing else. Sakaki had called the paper by then. The war chest was dry, and there was no coin to hold them anyway. Madoka's copies had reached 3 courts, and there were royal envoys on the road demanding to know why a church army was stuck in a marsh on federal ground. Maise was already disavowing the whole thing. Bane's men stood down off the pass, exhausted and alive, every one of them alive. It was over in 9 days, and the butcher's bill for 4,000 attackers and 6,000 defenders was, in the end, as close to nothing as war has ever come. All but a handful survived, and the handful the water almost took we pulled from it ourselves and warmed back to life before the fever could finish what the cold had started. Not one man on either side went home in the ground. The church was not broken by defeat. Armies survived defeat. The church had survived 100 of them, and a beaten army only feeds the story of a monster too strong to face. The church was broken by 4,000 witnesses. 4,000 of the blessed walked home, and they did not tell the story the church needed. They told the truth. They told it in taverns and in barracks and in chapels and to their own bishops 4,000 times, the same story from 4,000 mouths. We marched on the demon of Kurugai, and the demon could have killed us all, and instead he took our swords and healed our wounds and pulled us out of the water and fed us and let us go home to our families. They told about Bane's men who held the pass and did not butcher the wounded. They told about a winged girl carrying children over a forest. They told about a 12-year-old boy who closed their wounds and said, "You make peace when the fight is over." A church can command an army. A church cannot command 4,000 testimonies, and it certainly cannot command them to be lies when every man telling them was there. The story the church had spent 6 years building the monster, the crater, the demon lord who murders those who cross him died in 9 days. Not because we defeated it, but because 4,000 of its own knights came home and contradicted it with their own scars healed and their own children returned. You cannot fight a truth that 4,000 honest men are eager to tell. Joa had learned that once, in the ash of Misono, and set out to memorize a lie big enough to bury it. And I had spent 6 years, without knowing it, building the only weapon that beats a memorized lie, enough witnesses that the truth cannot be outnumbered. Shirasagi found me on the drained and flooded and drained ground when it was over, both of us filthy, Hikaru asleep on his feet between us with Go wrapped around his neck. Near enough 0 dead, she said. She sounded like she did not believe it, and she had counted it herself. 4,000 attackers, 6,000 of us, 9 days. And the only ones who nearly died went in the water and came back out because you fished them out yourself. That's not a battle. I don't have a word for what that is. It's a city, I said. It's what a city can do that a man can't. She looked at the 4,000 blessed strung out on the western road, walking home to tell the truth. You could have ended it in a minute. That's why I couldn't. She was quiet a while. Then, in the flat voice she uses for the things she means most, the old man was right, about building things that stand without their maker. Every piece of tonight was someone else's hands. Bane's pass, Madoka's treaty, Sakaki's ledger, Yuzuki's wings, my scouts. You didn't win this. She almost smiled. You just refused to lose it the wrong way and let the rest of us win it the right way. That's the whole job, isn't it? That's what a founder is, the one who refuses to win it the wrong way. Far to the west, a broken army walked home telling a truth, and in a stripped chapel an excommunicated cardinal listened to the first of his own knights recant, and understood that the church would not march again, that he had spent his last army, and it had come home loving the thing it went to kill. So Joa stopped trying to move the church, and he began alone to build the one weapon that did not require an army at all. 3 years after the crusade came home, loving the thing it went to kill, my city passed 100,000 people, and the continent quietly rearranged itself around a fact it could no longer ignore. I walked the streets of it one morning to make sure the fact was real, because I did not trust it. 100,000. From a lake of blood and a broken wall and a screaming baby in an oak chest, 100,000 souls, and I walked from the north gate to the river port, and it took me most of a day, and in that day, I saw the whole shape of what we had done. The terraces climbed the northern shoulder in a green stare to the clouds, feeding the city off ground 3 provinces had written off. The river port that Sakaki had warned we needed, and did not have, now moved grain and stone and iron by the barge load, and the teleport anchors moved the urgent freight, and the dragon post moved the word, so that Kurugai was the one place on the continent where cargo, coin, and message all traveled faster than anywhere else. 6 districts had become 40. Yuzuki's 1 schoolroom had become 9 schools. Bane's watch had become 1,000 strong and was still, by Madoka's furious accounting, the worst-run law-keeping body on the continent, and the only one the citizens would riot to defend. And every stone of it stood without magic. That was the thing I checked, walking, the way you probe a healing wound. Teshu's rule had held through 40 districts and 100,000 people. I could vanish tomorrow. The demon could be scrubbed out of the world entirely, and not one wall would shift, not one aqueduct would fail, not one house would come down on a sleeping family. I had built a city that did not need me. 6 years of it had become 9, and 9 of it had become the plain, unremarkable fact of a place that ran itself. The continent had rearranged itself, and I want to lay out how, because power is boring until you see it move, and then it is the most interesting thing in the world. Tawano could no longer govern us. We were federal ground, technically the queens, but 100,000 people with their own law and their own coin and their own food and their own defense are not governed by a distant crown. They are, at most, aligned with one. Madoka had written a body of statute that ran the city, and the crown ratified it because refusing to ratify it would have changed nothing except the crown's dignity. Maisei could no longer touch us. They had backed the crusade. The crusade had come home recanting and insolvent. Sakaki still held enough of their paper that a Maisei minister thought carefully before he thought about us at all. The border they had claimed for 100 years now had 100,000 people living on it who traded with everyone and threatened no one, and you do not march on 100,000 peaceful traders without every other kingdom asking why. Rengoku the Third Crown, the guarantor of the old compact, traded only through us now. We were the fastest freight and the safest market on the continent, and the safest market is a thing every merchant flows toward the way water flows downhill. Rengoku's whole eastern trade ran through Kurugai, which meant Rengoku's interest was our survival, which meant we had a great power's self-interest standing guard over us for free. And Queen Tsumugi ruled for the first time, for real. This surprised me most and pleased me most because it was the least intended. She had ennobled me to insult 2 crowns, a cool girl playing a cool move. But a queen is only as strong as her independence from her own nobles, and her nobles had owned her. They held the land, the grain, the levies, the coin, and she governed at their sufferance. Kurugai changed that. Suddenly the crown had a source of revenue in grain and manufactured goods that did not run through a single noble house. She could tax the trade that flowed through us. She could buy her armies bread from us instead of from a duke. For the first time, a queen of Tawano had a base that did not depend on the nobility, and Tsumugi, who I had thought a pragmatist and now knew to be something colder and better, used it to break the leash she'd been ruling on. She became a real queen off the back of a demon city, and she never thanked me, and I never wanted her to, because the honesty of pure self-interest is the most reliable alliance there is. I had done the impossible thing. I had built the city that made a second Misono impossible. Not a shelter. Not a hole with everything I loved at the bottom of it. A thing so woven into the roads and treaties and dinners of a continent that erasing it would mean waging war on half the world, and half the world does not go to war to please a church that its own knights no longer believe. I stood at the river port at the end of that long day, and I let myself feel it, the thing I had denied myself since the ash. Safety. Not my safety. Theirs, 100,000 people who could not be made to vanish. Genta's boy, 13 now, safe not because a demon held a wall but because a civilization stood around him. I should have known that a thing this large could still be struck, but not at the wall, never at the wall. At the one thing no wall was built to protect. I want to tell you about the 3 good years, because I have been giving you the movement of crowns, and the crowns are not the point, the same as the systems were never the point. The point lived in the house. Shirasagi and I did not reconcile the way stories reconcile, with a scene. We reconciled the way real people do, over years, in the accumulation of set places at the table, and shared night alarms and the slow silt of ordinary days. She never said it was all right. She still ran the orphanages plural now, 1 in every district, and she still would not say she loved the children, and she was still there before dawn. Somewhere in the 3 years the not saying became its own settled language between us, and I stopped needing the word. Because a woman who cooks for you every night and reminds you every morning whose gloves you wear has said the word in every way that matters except the one she cannot make her mouth do. Hikaru grew, and I watched him grow with the specific terror of a man who swore an oath on his soul to raise one particular child into the happiest man alive. He was happy, that is the plain report, and I turned it over every day looking for the flaw and did not find one. He had a mother who ran orphanages and would not admit she loved him and was there every morning. He had grown into a thunder dragon the size of a warhorse, insufferable, proud, who carried the eastern mail route and returned every night to sleep tangled around the boy the way he had since they were both small. He had Yuzuki, who had gone from a bound weapon in a warlord's pen to the headmistress of 9 schools, and who taught Hikaru herself, and who loved him in the open, uncomplicated way she had learned to love things once she learned her wings were not for hurting. He had a city. He had a dream he wanted to be a knight, which should have been a knife in me and was not, because Hikaru did not want to be a knight to avenge Misono. He did not know about Misono. He wanted to be a knight because he had grown up watching Bane's men stand on the right side of a line, and he wanted to stand on it too, and because he hated no one, and thought the point of being strong was to have hands gentle enough to heal the people you fought. He made no weather anymore. The wind and the hurricanes of his infancy had faded as he grew, the way a fever breaks, until by 13 he was, to every eye, an ordinary happy boy with an extraordinary gift for healing and a complete inability to hate. I did not understand then what the fading of the weather meant. I thought he was simply growing up. I was watching an oath approach its own fulfillment, and I read it as a childhood ending. One evening, the 3 of us and the dragon ate dinner in the house I had built twice, and Hikaru talked the whole meal about the night school in the capital, and whether Go could come with him and how you could be a knight and still never kill anyone if you were good enough, and Shirasagi caught my eye across the table and did the thing with the corner of her mouth, and I thought, this is it. This is the whole of what 2,000 years of hell was building toward without knowing it, not the city. The city was only the wall that made the dinner possible. The dinner was the point. I did not know it was nearly paid for. I thought I had years. The piece had a shadow, and the shadow had a name, and the name had been sharpening itself for 9 years while I built. Cardinal Joa. He was excommunicated now the church had cut him loose after the crusade came home recanting, because a church that has decided a thing is not a monster cannot keep the man who insists it is. They stripped his order, his title, his standing. They took everything from him except the one thing that had kept him alive in the ash of Misono 19 years before, the certainty that he alone had seen the truth, that he alone had survived to carry it, that a continent charmed by a demon's mercy was a continent walking asleep toward damnation, and that saving it was worth his soul, the way saving my son had been worth mine. He was not wrong that I was a demon. That is the thing I have made my peace with. Joa was, in his own broken frame, a righteous man, the most dangerous kind, the kind whose certainty is fed rather than starved by every setback. 4,000 recanting nights did not shake him. They proved to him how deep the enchantment ran. Excommunication did not stop him, it freed him. A church that would not act meant he would have to act alone, and a man who has spent 19 years alone with a certainty has a great deal of undistracted time. He had spent it turning obsession into a weapon. I know now what he did with those years, though I did not then. He had memorized the shape of my magic in the ash I had seen him do it, lips moving, cataloging, while I held a baby with both hands and let him live. And a demon's power leaves a signature, and a signature can be studied, and a man with 19 years and a fortune inherited from the ruin of his order can hunt down every relic and every scholar and every forbidden text that touches the binding of demon kind. He was not building an army. He had tried an army and it had come home loving me. He was building something an army cannot be. A single instrument, aimed not at the city, not at the wall, not at the 100,000, all of which he now understood he could not touch, but at the one thing that had made all of it possible. He had understood, better than I had, what held the whole structure up, not my power, the oath. The promise I had sworn on my own soul in the ash, the thing that bound me to Hikaru and, through Hikaru, to every stone I had laid since. Break a wall and a mason rebuilds it, break a treaty and Madoka writes another, break a market and Sakaki finds a new one. But the oath was the root, the founding contract, the one thing in the entire city that could not be rebuilt by other hands because it lived inside a demon's soul. Joa built a relic to strike the contract itself. Not the body, my body was beyond his reach, and he knew it. Not the city was beyond his reach, and he knew that too. He built a thing that reached past every wall I had raised in 9 years, past the ward keyed to 40 wills, past Bane's watch and Madoka's law and Sakaki's ledger, past all of it, to the naked founding oath at the bottom of everything, and he built it to crack that oath open. And he came alone. One old, broken, excommunicated man, walking east toward 100,000 people, carrying in a plain wooden case the only weapon on the continent that could still hurt me, aimed at the only thing no army of mine was built to guard. The city rested. It had earned rest. 100,000 people slept behind walls that stood without their maker, fed by terraces, guarded by treaty, watched over by the worst and best loved watch on the continent. Hikaru slept with Go wrapped around him, dreaming of the night school. Shirasagi slept at the orphanage's edge as she always did. Teshu, old now, 90 and grumbling, slept in a house he complained was still built wrong. Madoka, Sakaki, Yuzuki, Kaharu, Bane, all of them slept safe in the impossible thing we had made. None of them knew that the last blow of the whole long war was already on the eastern road, and that it was not aimed at any of them, and that no wall we had built in 9 years stood between it and its target. It was aimed at me, at the soul that had founded all of it. At the promise I made in the ash and forgot I was still paying every single day with the only currency a demon has. Joa did not come through the gate. There was no gate that could stop what he carried, and he knew it, and I think he took a bitter pleasure in walking past the whole machinery of a city built to keep men like him out, because none of it was built for him. The walls stood without magic. The watch knew every face. The treaty guarded the borders. And an old excommunicated man in a traveler's cloak walked through all of it unnoticed, carrying a plain wooden case, because 100,000 people cannot watch for the one enemy who has aimed himself at a thing no one else can see. He found me in the terrace fields at dawn. I go up there in the early mornings, before the city wakes, to look at the thing 3 provinces called a wall and Teshu called 100 fields. It is the closest I come to prayer. I knew him the moment I saw him, though 19 years had bent him nearly double. The certainty was the same. He had worn it in the ash, and he wore it now, that terrible calm of a man who has never once doubted he is the only sane person in the world. "You've built a great deal," he said. He looked out over the terraces, the waking city below, the dragon post lifting off the far rooftops. I want you to understand that I see it. I'm not blind to it. A demon builds a heaven and calls it a city, and 100,000 souls sleep in it and thank him. His voice was very tired. That's what damnation looks like at the end. It looks like this: peaceful, fed, grateful. That's how you know it's the real thing. A lie that hurts is easy to hate. A lie this kind is almost impossible to break. It's not a lie, I said. The water's clean, the doors lock, no one gets killed. Those are facts. You can hate the hand that made them. You can't make them into lies. No, he agreed, and opened the case. I can't, so I won't break the city. I've learned I can't. You taught me that. With 4,000 of my own men, I can't touch a single stone. He lifted out the relic. So I'm going to break the one thing that isn't a stone. I have seen many weapons in 2,000 years. I have been many weapons. The thing in his hands did not look like a weapon. It looked like a reliquary, old bone and older gold, the sort of object a church keeps in a vault and lies about the age of. But I felt it the way you feel a blade against the back of your neck before it moves, and what I felt was that it was not aimed at my body. It was aimed inside me, at the contract, at the oath. 19 years, Joa said. You gave me 19 years, demon, the day you chose to hold that child instead of finishing me. I've often thought about that. You could have ended me in the ash and you didn't, because your hands were full of the very thing I'm about to take from you. He raised the relic. I found the shape of your soul in the wreckage of Misono. I've spent my life learning to read it. And here's what I read, at the root of everything you've built, a promise. An oath, sworn on your own soul, to a child. It's the load-bearing thing. It's the foundation under the foundation. Break it, and the demon that made it has nothing left to stand on. He was not wrong about the shape. He was wrong about everything the shape meant, and he was about to prove it, and he did not know. He fired the relic. It did not strike me. I want to be precise, because after 9 years and 200,000 words of walls and armies, the thing that ended it did not land like a blow at all. It set a condition. That is the only way I can describe it. The relic reached past every defense I had ever built, past the ward keyed to 40 wills, past the walls that stood without magic, past the treaty and the watch and the ledger, all the way down to the naked oath at the bottom of me, and it laid a choice against it, cold and absolute, in a voice that was not Joa's and not mine. The oath you swore was sworn on your soul. A soul can be forfeit. Here are your terms. Kill the child, and keep your soul, your power, your immortality, everything you are. Or refuse, and the soul that swore the oath burns away entirely, and the demon with it. Break the promise or be unmade by it. That was the weapon. 19 years of obsession, distilled into a single elegant cruelty. Joa could not kill me and he could not kill Hikaru, so he built a thing that forced me to choose between them, and either choice destroyed the demon of Misono. Kill the boy, and I became again the thing he'd always said I was, a monster who murders a child to save himself, and the city would learn it, and the whole 9 years would rot from the root. Refuse, and my soul burned, and the demon ceased, and Joa would finally have scrubbed the wrongness out of the world. He had built a weapon that won no matter what I chose. And he stood there, doubled with age, holding the case, watching my face for the collapse. I refused before he finished offering. There was no drama in it. That is the part I want recorded most plainly, because a story wants the hero to agonize, to be tempted, to hold the terrible choice up to the light. I did not. I did not consider it for the length of a heartbeat. The relic laid its condition against my soul: kill the child or burn, and the answer was already there, had been there for 13 years, was the oldest and truest thing in me, older than the strike, older than the wall, older than hell. No, I said, I won't touch him, and I braced. I understood the terms. I had read the shape of the relic even as it read the shape of me, and I knew what refusal cost. My soul would burn. The demon would be unmade. I had lived 2,000 years, and I found, standing in a field I had turned from wall into harvest, that I did not mind that a soul spent refusing to hurt Genta's boy was the best use I had ever found for it, and the only one I had ever chosen freely. I braced for the burning. Joa watched, waiting for me to be unmade, waiting 19 years for the demon to gutter out. The relic did nothing. I want to explain what happened, because it is the whole meaning of the story, and it hid in plain sight for 200,000 words, and I did not see it, and Joa did not see it, and the only one who ever saw it was a heaven god I met once, and dismissed and misremembered for 13 years. When I swore the oath in the ash on my soul to raise Genta's boy into the happiest man alive, a god had spoken to me. I had told you I met gods and did not care for them, and that is true, and it is exactly why I did not listen properly. The god had said of the child in my arms, one day that child will destroy him. I had heard a prophecy, a warning. The kind of thing gods say to frighten you off a path, and I had ignored it because I ignore gods, and I had carried it in the back of my skull for 13 years as a threat I refused to fear. It was not a prophecy, it was a description. The oath was sworn on my soul, and an oath sworn on a demon's soul is not a wish or a hope, it is a binding, a contract, and it feeds. It has to feed, the way any working feeds, and I had never once asked what mine fed on because I had never wanted to know. Joa's relic answered the question by trying to strike the oath and finding nothing to strike. The oath fed on my demonic nature, on the wrongness, on the 2,000 years of hell and the strike from the sky and the thing I became over the empty chest. It burned my demon self as fuel, slowly, for one purpose and under one condition, for exactly as long as the child remained unhappy. An unfinished oath keeps feeding. A fulfilled oath stops. The god had not warned me that Hikaru would kill me. The god had told me how the oath worked, in the only language gods bother with. The day that child is happy truly, wholly, permanently happy, the day the oath you swore is fulfilled, the oath completes, and a completed oath consumes the last of what fed it, and the demon that swore it is spent. Not destroyed by an enemy, not burned by a relic, fulfilled. The child would destroy the demon by the simple act of becoming the happiest man alive, which was the exact thing I had sworn to make him. Joa's relic laid its condition against my soul and found that there was almost nothing left to burn. Because Hikaru, 13 years old, had a mother who ran orphanages and would not admit she loved him and was there every morning before dawn. He had a thunder dragon for a friend, grown and insufferable and wrapped around him every night. He had Yuzuki, who taught him herself and loved him in the open. He had 9 schools and 40 districts and 100,000 neighbors, and a city that had never once let him be afraid. He had a dream he wanted to be a knight, not for revenge, because he had no revenge in him, but because he wanted hands gentle enough to heal the people he fought. He hated no one, he made no weather anymore, he was happy. He had been happy for years, and the oath had been quietly completing for years, and the fated hurricanes of his infancy had been the sign of it all along, and I had read the whole thing as a childhood ending when it was an oath approaching fulfillment. The relic could not force me to kill the child, because the child's happiness had already spent the demon. And the relic could not burn away my soul in punishment for refusing, because the thing it needed to burn the demonic nature, the hell fuel, the wrongness Joa had spent 19 years hunting, was almost entirely gone. Consumed, fed to an oath that had done exactly what I swore it would do. Joa's masterwork struck the one part of me that was still forfeit, and found a demon who was, by the measure that mattered, already spent not by an enemy, but by a promise kept. He understood before I did. That is the mercy and the horror of it. He had studied my soul for 19 years, and he stood there in the terrace field and watched the relic reach for a demon and close on almost nothing, and I saw the certainty go out of his face for the first time since the ash. "It's not," he said. "The signature, it's—" He looked at the relic in his hands and back at me, and I watched a man's entire life fail in real time. "It's fading. You're fading." "But not because of I didn't," he was shaking. "What did you do? What have you done to your own—" "I kept a promise," I said, and I felt it begin. Not the burning he had aimed at me, something quieter, and worse, and better. The last of the demon in me was going. Not struck out. Spent. The 2,000 years of hell, the strike from the sky, the wrongness that a god had smelled, and Joa had hunted, and the church had marched 4,000 men against all of it, feeding, in these last moments, into an oath at the point of fulfillment, and I could feel the immortality going with it, and the power going with it, and I would learn other things going too that I did not yet know to grieve. I did not fall. I did not scream. I stood in the field I had turned from wall into harvest, an old excommunicated man in front of me with a failed masterwork in his hands, the city waking below us, and I felt myself becoming, for the first time in 2,000 years, something I had never once been. Not a demon holding a wall against the dawn. A man, watching the sun come up over a city that would stand without him, because he had built it that way on purpose, because an old craftsman had told him no. "You wanted to unmake me," I said to Joa, "and there was no anger in it. I had spent the anger years ago. You spent your life on it." I'm going to give you the thing you wanted, and you're going to find out it isn't a victory because you aimed a weapon at a demon and there's about to be no demon here to hit. Just an old man, like you. I looked down at the city. You should go home, Joa. There's nothing left here for your relic to find. There hasn't been for years. You just needed a boy to grow up happy to see it. He did not go home. Men like Joa do not go home. But that is the next part, and it is his ending, and he earned it. Below us, the city woke. The dragon post lifted off the rooftops. Somewhere in the eastern district, a 13-year-old boy was waking up next to a thunder dragon, thinking about night school, happy, unaware that his happiness had just, at that exact moment, finished the work of unmaking the only father he had ever known, which was the last and greatest thing the demon of Misono ever built, and the only one he built without meaning to. The demon did not die. That is the part no one warns you about. It would have been cleaner to die. Instead, I was hollowed out slowly, over days, the way a lake goes down in a drought, not gone all at once, but lower each morning, and each morning some new thing was simply not there. The immortality left first, and I felt it as an ordinary tiredness, the kind humans carry all their lives and never notice, and I noticed it because I had never once felt it in 2,000 years. Then the power. I reached for the ward on the second day out of habit, the way you reach for a railing in the dark, and there was nothing there, no working, no will that could move stone, no strike sleeping in the back of my skull. I was a man in a field, reaching for a thing that was not in his hands anymore and never would be again, and then the memories began to go. That was the cruelty I had not braced for, because I had not known to. The oath had fed on my demonic nature, and my demonic nature was not only the power, it was the 2,000 years, the hell, the wall that fell at dawn, all of it, the whole long wrongness that made me what I was. As it burned away, it took the years with it. I could feel them going the way you feel a room emptying behind you. Hell went first, and I did not mourn hell. But hell was where the floor was, and when the floor went, the things standing on it started to slide toward the edge. Genta began to go on the 4th day. I was telling Shirasagi about him. I had told her everything by then, the whole truth, all of it out at last, no hidden room left in a man being emptied of rooms, and I reached for his face, and it was not there. The broad, plain, decent man who had turned a copper coin over in his fingers and asked me to look after his family and taken my silence for a yes. I could remember that he had existed. I could not remember his face. And then, reaching for it, I felt the fact of him going too. Felt the knowledge that there had been a man named Genta start to loosen, and I understood with a horror worse than the empty chest that I was going to lose Misono. All of it. Ama, and the red gloves, and the old woman who understood heat, and the 2 years in the valley, and the day the sky came down, the whole beginning, the thing the entire city was built to answer for, was going to be scrubbed out of me along with the demon who had witnessed it. I would end as an ordinary man in a city he could not remember building, keeping a promise he could not remember making, to a boy whose parents he could not remember burying. Joa was still in the field. I had told him to go home, and he had not gone home, because he had nowhere left that was home, because he had spent 19 years and a fortune and an order and a soul on a weapon aimed at a demon, and the demon was fading in front of him for reasons his weapon had nothing to do with, and a man cannot go home from that. He stood in the terraces for 3 days, aiming the relic. That is what the city saw in the end, and it is the ending he earned, and I did not arrange it and could not have. He stood in an open field above 100,000 people, an old excommunicated man in a stripped cloak, holding a reliquary of bone and gold, aiming it at a thing that was less demon every hour and would soon be no demon at all, and he could not understand why it would not fire the way his life had told him it must, and he would not put it down. The city did not send its army, because it did not need one. It sent, of all things, some of the men who had marched in the crusade. They had settled in Kurugai, a good number of them. That was the thing the church never accounted for. 4,000 blessed had gone home telling the truth, and some of them had come back, because a man who has been disarmed and healed and fed by the enemy he came to kill sometimes decides that the enemy's city is a better place to live than the world that sent him to burn it. They had wives here now, and children in Yuzuki's schools, and they wore Bane's watch colors. And a handful of them walked up into the terraces and found the cardinal who had once commanded them aiming a weapon at their neighbor, and they did not kill him, because no one in my city kills, and they did not need to. They talked to him. I was not there for it. I was in the house by then, losing Genta's face, but Shirasagi was, and she told me. They told him what he had refused to hear from anyone, that they had marched for him and been beaten by mercy and gone home and come back and built lives in the demon's heaven, and that it was not damnation, It was just a place with clean water where their children were safe. They told him the demon had let 4,000 men live. They told him the demon was dying now, and not by anyone's hand, and that Joa's whole life had been aimed at a thing that was ending on its own and had never once been the thing he thought it was. One of them, an old sergeant, gray now, who had held a warm hilt in a flooded field 9 years before, took the relic out of Joa's hands gently, the way you take a knife from a child, and Joa let him, because there was nothing left in the cardinal to hold it with. They carried him away. Not to a cell, there was no charge. He had broken no law of the city, and Madoka would not invent one. They carried him to the church he had been cast out of, and set him at its gate, a broken old man who had spent 19 years being right about one fact and wrong about everything the fact meant, and the church that had excommunicated him took him back in the way you take back a thing you are ashamed of, quietly, and I never heard of him again, and I have found that I do not hate him, and cannot, having lost most of the years in which I might have. He aimed a weapon at a demon and stood there until the demon was gone in a field, in front of the very men he had once sent to die, and that is the whole of his ending. Not defeat, just a man who outlived the thing he built his life against, and found nothing on the other side of it. The city did not collapse. I want this recorded above everything else in this part, because it is the vindication of a stubborn old man's complaint from 9 years back, and it saved 1,000,000 lives without a single one of them ever knowing. A city built by a demon might reasonably be expected to fall when the demon falls. The ward keyed to my will gone, and it did not matter, because I had taught the ward to 40 people and then 100, and the platting no longer needed a demon at its root, only the will of whoever held it, a corner at a time, handed off at the shift change like a lantern. The teleporting anchors went dark with me pure demon working. They could not outlive their maker, but by then the river and the port and the dragon post carried everything the anchors had ever carried. Only a day slower, and a day slower is a thing a city survives, and a demon's absence is not. The walls raised on my mana they stood, because Teshu Korea had told me no, 9 years and 40 districts ago, and made me tear down my own best work and build it dull and heavy and true, on real foundations, mortared stone a mason could point to and repair. Anything raised by magic must stand without magic. I had obeyed him without argument for the first time in 2,000 years, and I had not understood why it mattered, and now I understood. It mattered because the day came when there was no magic, and the city did not so much as shudder. 100,000 people woke to clean water and locking doors and paying work and a watch that knew their names, and not one of them felt the demon leave the world, because the demon had built the world to run without him on purpose, out of a fear born over an empty oak chest, and the fear had turned out to be a blueprint for mercy. Teshu came to see me near the end. 90 years old, bent, furious as ever, and he stood in the doorway of the house and looked at me, an emptying man in mended red gloves, and he did not offer comfort, because Teshu had never once in his life offered comfort. "Half the city's still built wrong," he said. "You know that. The southern districts, the ones you did before I got here proper, they'll need rebuilding inside 40 years. Bad drainage, won't kill anyone, just wrong." He glared at me. "But the rest of it stands. All of it. Without you. Without magic. I checked it myself. Every district. These 3 days." He was quiet a moment, which for Teshu was an eternity. "You listened to me. One time in your life you listened. That's the only reason 100,000 people won't die when you go." He turned to leave and stopped, and said the closest thing to tenderness I ever heard from him. It was a good build, dull and heavy and true. Best kind. "Now die like a man and stop wasting my afternoon." He trained 400 students in his life. Every safe wall on the continent now traces back through one of them to an old man who told a demon no in a wet forest and made it stick. I did the last thing while I could still remember enough to do it. Shirasagi found me a thick blank notebook. She knew what I was going to do before I said it. She always knew the shape of me before I did, and I sat down at the table in the house I had built twice. In the mended red gloves my wife reminded me every morning whose they were, and I wrote it all down before it could go. Not the city. The city did not need writing down. It stood without me and would keep standing. I wrote down the things only I remembered, the things that were leaving with the demon, the things no wall could hold. I wrote down Genta while I could still find pieces of him broad, plain, decent, drafted, turned a copper coin over in his fingers, took my silence for a yes and went to war and did not give me up. I wrote down Emma, sharp-faced, who measured my hand and sewed red gloves so the rains wouldn't callous a demon who could not callous, and put a necklace on her newborn son from the strange, kind man who paid tolls no one asked for. I wrote down the old woman who scolded me about heat control and did not get out of her doorway. I wrote down that Misono had not been produced under questioning, that 200 farmers had been asked to give up a stranger, and had not out of loyalty to a demon they did not know they sheltered, but out of the plain decency that was the only thing the whole city was ever really built to answer for. I wrote down who cooked what in the valley. I wrote down the night of the fever and Shirasagi singing a bad king's orphanage lullaby until dawn. I wrote down every name I could still hold, and the faces, and who refused to name me, so that when I could no longer remember any of it, it would not be gone from the world. It would be in a book, in my son's hands. Then I gave the book to Hikaru. He was 13, and he had known for days that something was wrong with his father, because a boy who can heal a wound can feel one he cannot close, and I had told him the truth at last, all of it, because a boy about to inherit a book of the dead deserves to know he is in it. I told him about Misono, about the necklace he had worn out of the ash, about the oath, about what the oath had fed on and what fulfilling it had cost, and that the cost was not his fault, that it was the opposite of his fault, that he had done nothing but be happy, and being happy was the entire thing I had sworn to make him, and that a father who gets unmade by keeping his promise is the luckiest father who ever lived. He cried. Of course he cried. He was 13 and he was losing the only father he had, and he did the thing he always did, the thing that was the truest sign the oath was fulfilled. He pressed his hand to my chest and tried to heal it, tried to close the wound of a demon fading, and there was nothing to close because it was not a wound, it was a promise finishing. I can't fix it, he said. You already fixed it, I told him, 13 years ago. You just took your time about it. I closed his hands around the book, the way I had closed a gate boy's hand around a copper coin 2,000 years of grief ago. Everything I'm about to forget is in here. Genta, Ama, the gloves, who you are and who you came from and who wouldn't give me up. When I can't remember it anymore, and that's coming, soon you remember it for me. That's your inheritance, not the city. The city runs itself. This, the book. The names. Somebody has to hold the names. He held the book against his chest with both hands, the way I had held him in the ash. And I stood up from the table in the house I had built twice, in the mended red gloves, an old man now, and getting older by the hour, with most of the demon gone and most of hell gone, and Genta's face already a fact I knew rather than a thing I could see. And I stepped, at last, out of the story I had built, out of the 2,000 years, and the strike and the wrongness, out of everything that had made me the thing a god warned about, and a cardinal hunted, and a church marched against. Out of all of it, into an ordinary afternoon, in a city that did not need me, holding my son. The demon of Misono was gone. The man was just getting started, and he had a book to help him remember why. The city of 1,000,000 people is named Misono. I need to say that first, because it is the thing I could not say for 19 years and can barely say now, and because I want you to understand that they did not name it in memory of what burned. 20 years passed between the ash and the day the population crossed the 1,000,000 mark, and by then I was already old, and the naming came near the middle of it, not the end. Madoka drafted the charter the year the population passed the first great mark, and she came to me, an old man by then, gray, ordinary, remembering less every season, and asked what the city should be called, officially, on the compact of 3 crowns, in the mouths of what would one day be 1,000,000 people. I said Kurugai. It had always been Kurugai. The forest, the grant, the wet ground. She said no. Madoka, who had spent 20 years telling me no in the Queen's name, and then in the city's, and finally in her own, said no. A city needs a name that means something to the people who live in it, she said. Not a swamp, not a queen's insult to a rival crown. It should be named for the thing it was built to answer. She looked at me, and she knew the whole story by then. They all did. It was in the book, and the book was public now. Not in memory of Misono, in place of it. A village of 200 vanished and no one wrote it down, so we write it down 1,000,000 times over. Every letter, every treaty, every child's slate Misono, the name that couldn't be erased because it got too large to erase. So a village that burned because it would not give up a stranger became a city that could not be given up by anyone, and it carries the name of the 200 who died being decent, printed 1,000,000 times a day across a continent by the end, and that is the only headstone I ever wanted, and I did not even design it. Madoka did. She usually did the important things. Let me close the threads, because they earned their endings, and I can still hold most of them. Shirasagi runs the orphanages across the whole Federation, now dozens of them, in every district and in 3 provinces beyond, a network she built the way she once put down goblins on a road, except that this adds up to something, and she knows it adds up to something, and that is the atonement I promised her in the valley 20 years ago. She still will not say she loves the children. She is there before dawn. Rengoku invites her home every year, a formal invitation, a pardon, the crime forgiven. The brand on her wrist made a matter of history, and every year she declines it. And I asked her once why, and she said, in the flat voice she uses for the truest things, because home would be a place that forgave me. I don't want forgiveness. I want work that looks back. She kept the brand uncovered her whole life. She earned the right to hide it and chose not to. That is the most Shirasagi thing about her, and I married it on purpose. Yuzuki gave the first lecture in the history of the continent on the biology of the 6 races. I was there. An old man in the back of a hall she had built, watching a woman who had been a bound weapon in a warlord's pen at 10 years old stand in front of 500 students, human, beastmen, elf, horned folk, winged like her, and explain with charts that the differences between the races are real and physical and mean nothing about worth, that a beastman's ears and an elf's years and her own wings are simply variations, the way a river has variations, and that the differences exist for one reason only. So the conversations are interesting, she said. That's all. A world where everyone was the same would have nothing to talk about. The differences are the whole point of having anyone else to meet. The wings she had been ashamed of are the emblem on the city's every banner now. She never hides them. She teaches from the front of the room with them open. Go carries the mail between 17 settlements and is the most insufferable creature in either world. I mean this with love. He is a grown thunder dragon, enormous, magnificent, and he has decided that the mail is the single most important institution on the continent and that he personally is the reason it functions. He has a route. He has, I am told, opinions about the other flyers' routes. He returns every night to sleep near Hikaru's things even now, and he makes his small crack of thunder when he is pleased with himself, which is constantly, because a dragon who has decided he is essential is a dragon who is pleased with himself all the time. Hikaru's first word was his name. It remains, I think, the truest thing my son ever said. Teshukariya died at 90, grumbling. He had told me, near the end of me, that half the city was still built wrong, and he spent his last years being right about it, rebuilding the bad southern districts he'd blame me for, cutting the drainage he'd complained about for 20 years. He trained 400 students, 400, and every one of them carries the rule anything raised by magic must stand without magic, which they teach now as anything raised in haste must stand without the haste, because the magic is gone from the world, but the principle outlived the reason for it, the way the best principles do. He died in a house he complained was built wrong, in a city that stood without its founder because he had insisted it must, and I was there, old and mortal and forgetting, and the last thing he said to me was that my grief was sentimental and structurally unsound, and I should sit up straight. I miss him more than I have words for. He was the only man who ever told me no and made it hold, and 100,000 people lived because of it, and now 1 million do. Madoka complains, formally and in writing, that Bane's watch is the worst on the continent. She has filed this complaint every year for 20 years. It is a tradition now. The watch is enormous, sentimental, terrible at procedure, and it has the lowest killing on the continent and the highest thing Madoka still refuses to recognize as a legal category, informal resolution. And the citizens love it so much that when Madoka once proposed reforming it into a proper force, there was very nearly a riot, and Madoka, who weaponized law her whole life and knew exactly when law would lose to love, quietly withdrew the proposal and filed another complaint instead. Bane is old now, like me, and beloved, and he still fills a doorway, and he stood on the right side of a line for the first time in his life at Raymond's Fort 20 years ago, and he has not once stepped off it. His watch is impossible to reform and impossible to replace, and that is the highest thing a city can say about the people who keep it safe. Raymond lived out his years in the city and died a quiet man. Bound under a sole contract against the trade in people, he hauled stone with the crews he had once owned, sullen for the first years and then merely old, and the slaves he had kept watched him carry their walls and asked no other revenge than that, and it was enough for them, and I think in the end it was nearly enough for him. Sakaki grew old rich and stayed loyal to the prophet that lasts, which turned out to be us. Koharu ran the masons until her hands gave out and then ran the men who ran the masons, and the city belongs to its builders because she never once let anyone forget it, least of all me. And Geno Aburaya runs a bakery. This is my favorite ending, and I did not arrange it and would not have thought to. The grain baron, the smartest enemy I ever had, the man who cornered a continent's harvest and sold my truth to a cardinal, he lost the grain war, and then he lost the fortune, slowly, over years, to better run merchants in a market Sakaki had reshaped, and at the end of it Aburaya took what little was left and opened a bakery in the Misono River district, and he bakes bread, and it is very good bread, and no one who buys it knows that the pleasant, precise old man behind the counter once held 100,000 people by the throat with a signature. He knows I know. I go in sometimes, an old man buying a loaf from an old man, and we do not speak of it, and he charges me full price, and I pay it, because rules are rules, and I think he respects that more than any apology I could make. The most dangerous enemy of my life makes bread now, and the city he tried to starve is the city that keeps his bakery full, because it is easier to increase the number of allies than to decrease the number of enemies, and I have been proving that sentence for 20 years, and it has never once been wrong. Hikaru left at 15 to train as a knight. I want to tell it plainly, because it is the point of everything, the fulfilled oath walking out the door on its own 2 legs. He had the book by then, my book, the names of the dead, Genta and Emma and the 200, the whole beginning I could no longer remember but he could now recite. He knew who he was, he knew who had burned and why, and who had raised him, and what it cost. He had every reason a young man has ever been given to leave for revenge. He left for the opposite. I don't hate them. He told me, the morning he went, and he had to explain it to me twice, because the old man I had become could not hold why a boy who knew his whole village had been murdered would want to join the order of the men who murdered it. The church that burned Misono isn't the church that healed 4,000 men in the marsh and sent some of them back to live here. Joa was one man. The knights who came home telling the truth were 4,000. I don't want to punish the order. I want to be the kind of knight that makes the Joas impossible, the kind with hands gentle enough to heal the people he fights, standing on the right side of a line like Bane's men, so that the next time someone points an army at a village of 200, there's a knight in it who says no. He shouldered his pack, circled overhead, furious about being left behind and already planning, I suspected, to follow. I hate no one. Everyone I meet finds that strange. You're the only one who never did. I did not find it strange because I had built a city out of exactly that principle and then forgotten I built it. He was the principle made flesh. He was the whole answer to hell, walking out a gate to go be gentle at the world professionally, and I stood in the door of the house I had built twice and watched Genta's son leave to become the best of the thing that killed Genta, out of love and not revenge, and I understood that the oath was not just fulfilled. It had compounded. I had sworn to make one boy the happiest man alive, and the happiest man alive had turned around and decided to spend that happiness making other people safe. That is not a thing I taught him. I could not have. It was in him from the ash. I only kept him alive long enough for it to grow. So here's the last scene, and it rhymes with the first, and I did not plan the rhyme planned itself the way the best endings do. I am old now, gray, ordinary. Mortal, which means I will die, which after 2,000 years of not dying is the most extraordinary gift I have ever been given, because a thing that ends is a thing that mattered. I remember very little of before the city. Genta is a fact in a book my son carries and reads to me on his visits home. Hell is gone entirely and good riddance. Most days I am simply a man in a city, and the city does not need me, and that is not a sorrow, it is the whole thing I built. I walked down to the north gate today because someone told me new arrivals came in overnight refugees, the ordinary displaced, the 200s that vanish everywhere else and do not vanish here. And out of a habit I cannot explain and have never broken, I go to pay the entry toll. 1 copper. Into my own city, which I founded and which bears the name of the dead I can no longer remember except through a book. The gate guard is one of Raymond's old bandits. Older than me, nearly, one of the 300 workers from the fort 20 years ago, and he has stood this gate for 2 decades and he knows exactly who I am, and he refuses the coin, the way the gate boy refused it in Misono a lifetime of grief ago. You don't pay to enter your own city, old man. He says, laughing, exactly the way Misono laughed, the free way that means nothing except that you are warm and among your own. Rules are rules. I tell him, and I press the copper into his hand and close his fingers around it, the way I have closed 100 hands around this exact debt. It's a promise I made to myself, a long time ago. I don't remember most of the long time ago anymore, but I remember the promise. My wife reminds me. He shakes his head and lets me pass, and keeps the copper, because he always keeps it, and there is a jar in the gatehouse full of 20 years of my coppers that no one will spend. I go to the new arrivals. There is a fire pit by the north gate. I had it built for exactly this, though I have forgotten I had it built. I grill meat for whoever came in today. The way I grilled a thunder dragon by a well in a village that laughed at nothing and everything, and the new arrivals eat, and their children get grease on their faces, and someone laughs, and no hurricane comes, because the boy who made the weather grew up happy and left to be a knight, and the city he grew up in is true and will hold. I pull on the red gloves before I take the skewers. They are mended a dozen times over, the red faded nearly to gray, the only thing from the before that I have not forgotten. And I have not forgotten it because my wife tells me every single morning whose hands made them and why. Ema, sharp-faced, sewed them so the rains wouldn't callous a man she was kind to. I cannot remember her face. I remember the gloves. It is enough. It is in fact everything. Shirasagi finds me at the fire, as she always does. Old too now, still declining Rengoku's pardon every year, still there before dawn at the orphanage, still refusing the word and setting the place at the table that means the word. Look at you, she says, grilling meat for strangers, human almost. For 2,000 years. I tell her, and I have to say it slowly, because I am reading it off the last of what I remember, off the shape the book has left in me. I thought surviving meant no one could kill you. I built walls that fell at dawn and I built them again, forever, because that was the only survival I knew, unkillable, alone. I hand a skewer to a child who came in from nowhere overnight and will not vanish, because this city does not let people vanish. Turns out that's not surviving. That's just not dying. She waits. She always lets me finish, now that finishing takes me longer. Surviving, I say, is someone calling you in for dinner. And she does. She takes my arm, an old woman and an old man in a city that carries the name of 200 dead who would not give up a stranger, and she calls me in for dinner, and I go, and the gate guard keeps my copper in a jar, and my son is off being gentle at the world, and the walls stand without me, and the demon is gone, and the man goes home to eat.